Chapter 682. How sad. Tristan closed his eyes and said this sentence coldly, contrary to his current expression. However, even if Tristan's eyes were closed, Drunk Hassan did not think that the other party could not see it. Your purpose is for me, right? In that case, I'll use my life in exchange for the survival of my compatriots. I hope you can retreat, Drunk Hassan said. After all, chasing a group of refugees all the way to the desert. If there was no temptation, how could anyone go to this extent? Indeed, the reason why I'm chasing them like this is also for you. One of Hassan, Tristan admitted generously. However, the mission given to me by the higher-ups is to hunt down the refugees. Finding Hassan is just an unexpected surprise. In short, Tristan meant that hunting down the refugees was the main mission and killing Hassan was just a side mission. In that case, I'll use my head as the price to make you unable to move your legs and right arm for the rest of the day. Drunk Hassan said as he picked up the dagger in his hand and slashed at his own neck. Although it was a dagger, as long as there was a special technique, it was possible to cut off a head. With her identity as Hassan, she could also throw her head to Tristan within a few seconds after the head was cut off. Although Tristan's character was not like the Knights of the Round Table of King Arthur in the books, Drunk Hassan knew that even so, he was still a knight of the Lion King. She could definitely make Tristan, as a knight, abide by the agreement she made by using such a semi-coercive method. He hoped that after his death, these compatriots could successfully reach the mountains in the north. As long as they entered the mountains, the other Hassan hiding in them would definitely find them. That way, they would be safe. Just like how time slows down before death, Smoky Drunk Hassan thought carefully. However, Drunk Hassan found that the dagger he was slashing at himself could not be cut down. It was as if there was an invisible wall between his neck and the dagger, and this wall blocked the dagger from cutting his neck. At this moment, a voice came from beside him. If your death only requires Tristan's legs and right arm to remain motionless, then your sacrifice is meaningless. Drunk Hassan subconsciously turned his head. A silver knight, whose face could not be seen at all, was standing beside him, fully armed to the head and completely unable to see his face. The silver knight was Wuming, who had been watching from the sky. Looking at the patterns on Wuming's armor, Drunk Hassan's heart trembled. Then, he quickly distanced himself from Wuming. That was because it was the coat of arms of the Knights of the Round Table. Although something prevented Smoky Drunk Hassan from committing suicide, just now, Smoky Drunk Hassan found that he wasn't being controlled by others. He could still move freely. Reinforcements from the Holy City. Drunk Smoke Hassan looked at Wuming warily. However, amidst her vigilance, she also had doubts. Because if there was no one else around, then the one who used an unknown method to stop him from committing suicide would be this unknown knight in front of him. He was probably the one who said those words just now. Of course, Drunk Hassan didn't think that this knight was here to help him. After all, he probably didn't want him to commit suicide to get information from him. Moreover, Drunk Smoke Hassan had some doubts about the knight's words. What do you mean by that? Drunk Hassan asked cautiously. The sentence that Drunk Smoke Hassan asked was the sentence, "Sacrifice is meaningless." At this time, Tristan answered for Drunk Smoke Hassan. Sir Villo is right. I don't need to draw my bow at all. I can kill with just a flick of my finger. As if to verify his words, Tristan's right hand that was holding a magic bow that resembled both a bow and a zither lightly touched the strings of the zither. In an instant, invisible vacuum blades slashed towards a group of refugees along with zung-zung sounds. Not good. Drunk Smoke Hassan was shocked. Although he couldn't see Tristan's attack, Drunk Smoke Hassan knew that it was after the whoosh sound that her two compatriots became corpses. However, Drunk Smoke Hassan could only watch because he had no way to defend against such an attack. Moreover, even if he could defend against such an attack, he couldn't see Driss' attack. As a last resort, Drunk Smoke Hassan could only pray. Just like the first Hassan, although Driss' attack was launched, no one died. In other words, there was an invisible defense that blocked Driss' attack. Drunk Smoke Hassan thought in his heart and looked at Wuming. "Don't worry, unknown Hassan. I'm here to save you," Wuming said to Drunk Smoke Hassan without moving. At this time, several people suddenly became excited. Sir Drunk Smoke, this Sir Knight, is the one who saved us at the gate of the holy city. A bold refugee shouted. Yes, yes, Sir Drunk Smoke, I remember this Sir Knight's armor. Me too, I recognize this Sir's voice. He is the Sir Knight who saved us before. Several refugees who remembered Wu Ming's voice and armor trembled and stood up. Wu Ming looked at these people with some surprise. Although they were evil people who were not chosen by the holy light, they stood up for their benefactor. This was enough for them as ordinary people. Wu Ming's mouth hidden under the helmet curved up. Sure enough, it didn't mean that people who were not chosen by the holy light were evil people. They could stand up for Wu Ming, and they didn't disappoint Wu Ming, who saved them before and now. Drunk Smoke Hassan, who heard the refugees' words, was a little surprised. She didn't expect that the knight who saved her compatriots was really a knight of the Round Table. She was still wondering if it was a wild servant, but she didn't expect it to be a knight of the Round Table. In this way, she didn't see the knight before. After all, the knight was likely to be summoned by the Lion King, and looking at the knight's appearance, he was likely to have betrayed the Lion King. What do you mean, Sir Villo? Tristan closed his eyes and looked in the direction of Wu Ming. Although he destroyed his eyes because he killed his compatriots before, it didn't mean that he was blind. After all, he used to like to close his eyes, and he could still move normally. Whether it was the sensitivity of his ears or the magical enhancement of his eyes, the self-destruction of his eyes had no effect on Tristan. However, in the face of Tristan's question, Wu Ming just replied faintly, "They are under my protection." Chapter 683. Sir Villo, your words are really sad. Are you going against my king? With a sad sigh, Tristan shook his head helplessly. Although Tristan had just left the holy city when Artoria issued the order of Wu Ming is the enemy, it did not mean that Tristan was a fool. The refugees that Agul asked him to hunt down were released by Wu Ming. In addition, Wu Ming came all the way here to save these refugees, and Wu Ming's attitude was problematic. All these factors told Tristan that Wu Ming and his king were likely to have a falling out. Think what you want. In short, I will protect them today. Wu Ming said, and a magic power in his body condensed. Like a lion proclaiming his territory, Wu Ming vented his magic power. Whether it was Tristan, Drunk Hassan, these refugees, or a few people from the Fourth Force hiding in the dark, all of them were shocked by Wu Ming's huge magic power. Immediately, Wu Ming turned to look at Drunk Hassan and nodded to him. Drunk Hassan was stunned, and then nodded as if responding to Wu Ming. "Quick, everyone, follow me!" Drunk Hassan shouted at the refugees. Drunk Hassan was not a fool. Since someone was willing to help him resist Tristan, then he quickly escaped with the refugees. As for gratitude, he would talk about it when he had the chance to meet in the future. Although the refugees were trembling in fear, they were people who had experienced life and death. Therefore, when Drunk Hassan shouted at them, the refugees immediately reacted. The refugees hurriedly moved in the direction designated by Drunk Smoke Hassan. Before the refugees moved, almost everyone gave Wu Ming a brief look to express their gratitude for saving their lives for the second time. Because of the urgency of time, Drunk Hassan only nodded to him. After a simple expression of gratitude, she quickly followed the refugees and headed north. Seeing the refugees and Drunk Hassan gradually disappear, Wu Ming turned his head and looked at Tristan. "You're really giving me face." After all, if Tristan attacked the refugees with all his strength, Wu Ming really couldn't defend against all of Tristan's attacks. "You're too serious. Even if we become enemies, I still respect you," Tristan said as he saluted Wu Ming. Tristan was right. If Artoria did not become the king, but Wu Ming became the king, then the Knights of the Round Table's loyalty to Wu Ming would not be lower than the current Artoria. At least, if Wu Ming was the king, Tristan would not say that the king did not understand people's hearts. However, there was no if Tristan and the other Knights of the Round Table, but this did not prevent them from respecting Wu Ming very much. However, Tristan, who had become the Lion King's knight, now only had one goal, which was to completely eradicate the Lion King's enemies. His hands that were stained with the blood of his compatriots could no longer draw his bow. The guilt of killing his compatriots had also pushed Tristan to the brink of collapse. King Arthur's Knight of the Round Table, Tristan, had disappeared and was replaced by the Lion Knight Tristan, who had received the blessing of the Lion King's Holy Grail. Therefore, even if he killed his compatriots, he would not feel sad. Even if he attacked the person he respected the most, he would not feel guilty. That is to say, after this, you are no longer the respected Villo, but an enemy. Wuming took down the meteor silver on the right side of his head and brandished it. As expected of you, Tristan, this powerful strike is even stronger than when you were at your peak. However, facing Wuming's praise, Tristan shook his head calmly and said in a cold tone, "Even so, didn't you instantly take out your beloved sword and block this strike?" Yes, Tristan instantly launched an invisible vacuum attack, and Wuming instantly took out the meteor silver, allowing Tristan's strike to hit the meteor silver. The reason why Wuming used the meteor silver to block the attack instead of blocking it with his psychic power was because Wuming was ready to fight. I really hope that Sir Villo can take the initiative to step aside. If you do that, after I deal with the refugees and that Hassan, I can still plead for you to the king. Tristan shook his head regretfully. Tristan's arrogant words made Wuming smile. You know my personality. If you don't defeat me, don't even think about leaving today. After Wuming finished speaking, magic power burst out from his feet. In an instant, Wuming burst toward Tristan. Facing Wuming, who rushed over, Tristan picked up his magic bow expressionlessly. That's really sad, Sir Villo. The battle was about to start. Not far away, the fourth force hidden here secretly hid in a place with a lot of stones. Don't look, dear Da Vinci. Hurry up and think about what we should do next. An orange-haired girl lowered her voice and looked at a big sister who looked almost exactly like Mona Lisa with a sad and helpless face. This orange-haired girl was the last master of humans who solved the 5 singularities and formed a fate with many heroic spirits. The normal master of the Human Survival Protection Organization, Finest Chaldea, Finest Tachika Gadazzi, and the big sister Mona Lisa beside Gadazzi was the third servant summoned by the former director of Chaldea, Leonardo da Vinci. In addition, beside the two, there was a little girl dressed in sexy clothes. Cough, cough. Gadazzi's contracted servant, the subservient possessed by the Holy Grail Knight Galahad, Matthew Gillett. As early as when Tristan caught up with drunk Smoke Hassan and Wuming stopped Tristan, the 3 of them had already arrived here. When Da Vinci said that whether it's a bow or a full body armor, we can't beat them, Gadazzi and Matthew were pulled away by Da Vinci to hide. The reason why Gadazzi suddenly asked was that Da Vinci's expression at the moment was a little strange. At this moment, as if watching a play, Da Vinci looked at the fierce confrontation between the Holy Sword Knight and the magic-bound knight not far ahead. Well, what's the matter, Tachika? Isn't it good for us to benefit from the fight between 2 tigers? Da Vinci didn't look back and continued to look forward happily. The good student Matthew raised his hand and asked Da Vinci puzzledly. But, Da Vinci, the Silver Knight, seems to be a good person. Shouldn't we help? Gadazzi, who was standing at the side, also nodded vigorously. Because Da Vinci said that the 2 knights were not ordinary servants, the 3 of them hid far away, just in case. Although the distance was a little too far, Gadazzi couldn't hear the conversation, but through her own eyes, Gadazzi could still see the current situation. The knight with the bow killed a few people, and the servant suspected to be one of Hassan wanted to commit suicide, but for some reason, he stopped when the Silver Knight appeared. After that, the servant suspected to be Hassan left with the refugees, leaving the Silver Knight to fight against the magic-bound knight. In this way, the Silver Knight was likely to be a good person. Facing the doubts of Matthew and Gadazzi, Da Vinci smiled and explained, "Let's not talk about how you 2 judge that the Silver Knight is a good person. Moreover, we can't intervene in the battle between servants of their level." Chapter 684. Gadazzi and Matthew both exclaimed and then calmed down. It seemed that what Da Vinci said was right. Then do we need to leave? Gadazzi asked. After all, the refugees had already left, and they couldn't intervene in the battle between the two knights. It seemed that the only answer left was to leave. However, Da Vinci smiled and shook his head. This made Gadazzi and Matthew confused. Why was he so hesitant to advance and not to retreat? Why was he being so hesitant? At this time, Gadazzi's bracelet made a sound. Well, I think Da Vinci meant for you to wait and see. I forgot that there was a doctor, Matthew said awkwardly. Matthew's words are really hurtful. Even if I couldn't contact you for a while, you wouldn't have forgotten about me. Roman's words were full of powerlessness. When Gadazzi and the other two came to this singularity, they appeared directly in the desert. Because of the enchantment, Gadazzi and the other two had lost contact with Chaldea for a while. It wasn't until they walked out of the desert that they contacted Roman. After that, after a brief understanding of Gadazzi's experience, Roman and Da Vinci suggested that they go to the Holy City to have a look. Previously, in order to contact Gadazzi, Roman had risked his life a little. Therefore, he rested for a while and didn't say anything. In addition, Roman's presence was indeed a little low, so Gadazzi and the other two, no, it should be Gadazzi and Matthew, ignored Roman for a while. Oh, I'm sorry, Gadazzi smiled embarrassedly. Forget it, after all, I'm used to it. Fortunately, the director is not here, or I would be scolded again. After all, it was the fault of the person operating the spirit particle transfer device that sent Gadazzi and the other two to an unknown enchantment. Speaking of Olga Marie, Matthew remembered something and asked, "Is Miss Teeps still in the superintendent's room?" Then, Roman's voice was heard. "Yes, that's right. This time, the director has figured out a little bit of the third method." As the director's follower, Miss Teeps was naturally affected. They haven't come out yet. As he spoke, Roman began to feel distressed. If it weren't for the fact that Miss Teeps couldn't accompany you to the singularity this time, I wouldn't have let Da Vinci accompany you. Due to the third law of Olga Marie's body, Pamilia was unable to accompany Gadazzi and Matthew on the singularity exploration. Therefore, Leonardo da Vinci, who had volunteered to accompany Gadazzi and Matthew, had volunteered to accompany them. After all, I'm also a follower of Chaldea. I haven't been to the singularity even once. Leonardo da Vinci said with a heartless smile. I hope you can accompany me here. If you are here, I'm afraid there won't be an accident with the spirit particle transfer. Even if there is an accident, with your technology, you can break through the enchantment and contact Tachika. Roman sighed. This was not a compliment. After many tribulations, the various equipment of Chaldea had been upgraded by the genius Da Vinci. If Da Vinci were to operate it, it would be much better than Roman. Well, you can contact us now. It's already very good. Da Vinci comforted Roman. Boom! Suddenly, an explosion sounded not far away from Gadazzi and the other two. The explosion set off a gust of wind mixed with gravel and hit Gadazzi. "Senior, be careful," Matthew shouted and instantly materialized a shield in front of Gadazzi. Clang, clang, clang. The gravel was like a bullet hitting Matthew's shield, making a messy collision sound. After a while, the wind calmed down and the gravel no longer shot at Matthew's shield. "Senior, are you okay?" Matthew turned to look at Gadazzi with concern. "I'm fine. Thank you, Matthew. It's all thanks to you." Gadazzi smiled and gratefully hugged Matthew. "Senior, it's good that you're okay." Matthew's face was slightly red as he turned his head. At this time, Leonardo da Vinci spoke with a strange voice. "Ah, big sister, I was ignored just like that. I'm so sad, Gadazzi and Matthew looked at Leonardo da Vinci helplessly. "Speaking of which, dear Leonardo da Vinci, do you really mean that we should wait and see like what the doctor said?" Gadazzi asked in a hurry. The reason why she was so anxious was because those two knights are almost here. "Senior, dear Leonardo da Vinci?" Matthew looked at Wu Ming and Tristan, who were gradually approaching them, and reminded in a panic. It was precisely because Wu Ming and Tristan were fighting that they got closer to this side that the situation of gravel flying everywhere happened. and they couldn't beat the other party at the moment. If they were discovered, they would definitely be treated as thieves. Maybe there would be another misunderstanding, and they would have to start fighting with the other party again. However, according to Leonardo da Vinci, they couldn't beat the other party at all, whether it was a one-on-one or a group fight. Don't worry, take a closer look at the fully armed knight over there. Leonardo da Vinci reminded them. Hearing that, Gadazzi and Matthew looked at Wu Ming, who was gradually suppressing Tristan. Suddenly, Gadazzi and Matthew came to a realization. It's assassin. It's Senior Sira? The two of them saw the armor worn by the knight who was suppressing Tristan. The armor was basically the same as the armor that Wu Ming entrusted to Gadazzi when she left the fifth singularity. That's right, that's Sira's armor. Leonardo da Vinci had an expression of, "You finally realized." Gadazzi and Matthew could only scratch their heads helplessly. After all, Gadazzi was just an ordinary person. Because of the distance, although Gadazzi could still see Wu Ming, she couldn't see it clearly. Matthew was the same. As an immature subservient, she couldn't add magic to her eyes to improve her vision like Leonardo da Vinci, so she couldn't see it clearly. And now, they could see it clearly, and Gadazzi and Matthew also understood why Leonardo da Vinci didn't let them go. Because the person in the armor was likely to be Wu Ming. Moreover, even if the other party wasn't Wu Ming, he must be someone who had a great relationship with Wu Ming. Therefore, choosing to contact the other party was the most advantageous option at the moment. What? That knight is Sira? That's too ridiculous. He's a warrior of Ulster. How could he come here? Roman felt that his brain had gone haywire. First, it was the Egyptian pharaoh, and then the Lionheart King that Roman proposed a contact was gone. Then, a Lionheart King appeared out of nowhere, and there was also a knight who seemed to be an acquaintance. No matter what, the other party is related to Assassin, so he must be a good person. Gadazzi decided that she would contact the other party. Then, Senior, should we help the enemy who seems to be Senior Sira? However, Leonardo da Vinci answered first. I don't think so, because Wu Ming had already defeated Tristan. Chapter 685. A moment later, Wu Ming rushed towards Tristan with meteor silver in his hand. Facing Tristan, although Wu Ming was a little cautious, he didn't care too much about Tristan. Tristan's fame wasn't as big as Wu Ming and Wu Ming, but Wu Ming didn't think that Tristan was weak. On the contrary, Tristan was very strong, not weaker than Lancelot. Knights of the Round Table were considered the best among the servants, and all knights of the Round Table had the adaptability of the saber, swordsman, class. It was reasonable to say that Tristan should also be a swordsman, but because Tristan's magic bow was more famous than his sword-wielding deeds, Tristan's archer class adaptability was much higher than the saber, swordsman, class adaptability. And this time, Tristan was an archer class. Even if it wasn't the best saber, swordsman, class, the archer class itself was one of the 3 excellent knight classes. Therefore, Tristan wasn't afraid of Wu Ming, who was a saber, swordsman class. His magic bow, not to mention the speed and angle of the vacuum arrow, the speed of his magic bow could catch the enemy off guard. No matter how good the person's martial arts were, they couldn't completely avoid his attack. However, as a member of the Round Table, Wu Ming naturally knew this. But Wu Ming was still not afraid of Tristan. And the reason why Wu Ming wasn't afraid of Tristan was also discovered by Tristan. And that was, he couldn't hurt Wu Ming at all. Ding, ling, ling, ling. Tristan gently plucked the strings of the magic bow in his hand, and several invisible attacks appeared out of thin air and attacked Wu Ming. Zung, zung, zung. The vacuum blade made a sound in the air, and Tristan was sure that his attack had hit Wu Ming, but the opponent was completely fine. This again, Tristan frowned slightly, then suddenly rolled and dodged the sword chi released by Wu Ming using meteor silver. The sword chi of meteor silver slashed into the ground, and the originally barren land instantly had a deep gully that wasn't wide. Every time Tristan attacked Wu Ming, those invisible vacuum blades that slashed onto Wu Ming had no effect, as if a machete was cutting cotton. However, in Tristan's impression, as a knight of the Round Table, he didn't have such a strange ability. Closing his eyes, Tristan relaxed his brows and looked at Wu Ming. It seems that you still have some tricks up your sleeve. However, Tristan's didn't Paz's words. Was sin SSSS. S's. It couldn't be helped. No matter what kind of clothing or armor it was, it couldn't defend against the attack of vacuum unless it was some kind of special clothing or armor. However, this did not mean that Wu Ming was defenseless. The principle of the vacuum arrow was to use atmospheric pressure to attack. Wu Ming concentrated all of his mental power on the surface of his body, pushing out all of the air on the surface of his body. As a result, a layer of vacuum formed on the surface of Wu Ming's body. As for Wu Ming's mental power, after pushing out the air, it constantly caused friction between the surrounding air and the vacuum zone, causing a fault to form between the vacuum zone and the air. As long as something approached Wu Ming's surroundings, it would be cut off by the fault around Wu Ming's body. This caused Silent Cry to be surrounded by a layer of invisible vacuum defense. Using fire to attack fire, water to attack water, and air to attack air would cancel each other out. When Tristan's vacuum arrow came into contact with Wu Ming, the vacuum arrow and vacuum zone canceled each other out. That was why it was said that the power of science was the greatest. For an ancient person like Tristan, it wasn't that Wu Ming mocked him, but he was indeed outdated. Of course, Wu Ming definitely wouldn't tell Tristan about his methods. That's why. Can't you retreat yourself? Although Wu Ming said that he had no intention of letting Tristan leave. The moment Wu Ming finished his words, he released magical power from his feet and attacked Tristan once again. Tristan shook his head calmly. Although his attacks were basically useless against Wu Ming and his vacuum traps were also likely to be ineffective, Tristan didn't think that Wu Ming could keep defending against his attacks. For example, noble artifacts and the like. The outcome isn't certain yet. The moment before Wu Ming attacked, Tristan used the power of the wind brought about by the magic bow to move his body swiftly and easily dodged Wu Ming's attack. Boom! Wu Ming's sword fiercely struck the ground where Tristan had been standing. Only a dong sound could be heard, and crushed stones flew everywhere. Then, I shall defeat you with my next attack. In an instant, Wu Ming raised the meteor silver. Tristan's blind eyes trembled slightly. He understood what Wu Ming was trying to do. Wu Ming was about to unleash his noble artifact. However, this was exactly what Tristan wanted because he was about to unleash his noble artifact. Stained with the blood of the legendary dragon and comparable to Excalibur, Tristan looked at the glowing holy sword in Wu Ming's hand. After all, he and Wu Ming were once comrades, and he knew quite a lot about this holy sword. If it's the noble artifact, I can't defeat you. At this moment, Wu Ming's holy sword was shining brightly. Although Tristan said that he couldn't defeat him, he still picked up the magic bow. However, I have the blessings of my king, so the outcome is still uncertain. Silver, fail not. Almost at the same time, Wu Ming and Tristan unleashed their noble artifacts at the same time. Tristan's hand continuously moved his magic bow at an extremely fast speed that couldn't be seen by the naked eye. In an instant, countless vacuum threads that were almost visible to the naked eye wrapped around Wu Ming at an extremely fast speed. Wu Ming stood in the same place, holding the holy sword that was getting more and more solid. But what made Tristan puzzled was that Wu Ming didn't move at all. Tristan couldn't help but frown. He clearly remembered that Wu Ming's noble artifact was the same as Artoria's light cannon. But now, Wu Ming actually hid the light of the holy sword. Tristan didn't understand what Wu Ming was doing, but it didn't hinder his noble artifact. Tristan controlled the magic bow with one hand and plucked the bowstring, or rather, the strings of the zither with the other. Although Wu Ming used an unknown method to defend against his attack, the change in quantity led to a qualitative change. The pond couldn't withstand the impact of the sea, the flame couldn't withstand the impact of the explosion, and the more powerful and chaotic vacuum would devour the weaker vacuum. Coupled with the Lion King's blessing, as long as these attacks hit, Tristan could guarantee that Wuming would be seriously injured even if he didn't retreat. However, just as Tristan's countless vacuum threads were about to approach Wuming, Wuming suddenly entered a purplish-black ripple and disappeared. What? Chapter 686. Tristan controlled the threads to enter the dark purple ripple, trying to catch up to Wuming, who was engulfed by the dark purple ripple. Then Tristan was stabbed in the back. Slash! The sound of a sword piercing into flesh came from behind Tristan. What? PFFF! Tristan gasped in disbelief. Then he spat out a mouthful of blood. He could clearly feel an attack from a noble artifact slashing his back. Even though he couldn't see his back, Tristan could still feel that the slash had slashed his back from his shoulder to his lower back. The invincible Tristan fell. Then he turned his head around and looked behind him. Two dark purple ripples appeared behind Tristan, similar to the one where Wuming was. In one of the ripples, countless threads that belonged to Tristan's noble relic also came out. However, these threads entered the second dark purple ripple. As for where the threads that entered the second dark purple ripple went, Tristan had no idea. However, he now knew how Wuming got behind him and avoided his noble relic that went deep into the dark purple ripple. You should have heard some rumors, right? I'm not human. Tristan removed his noble relic, and Wuming kept the three dark purple ripples. Tristan nodded helplessly. Yes, that's right. I've heard rumors that Sir Villo isn't human. Tristan began to use the term of address, and since Tristan said so, it meant that he was aware of Wuming's situation. Even so, you and His Majesty are still the most respected people among the Knights of the Round Table. Tristan's tone started to become gentle, as if the words of a dying man are kind. However, Wuming kicked Tristan unhappily. All right, you're talking like you're leaving. I've held back. I didn't hurt your spirit core. Although Tristan's back was slashed open by Wuming's noble artifact, and he spat out a lot of blood, Tristan's spirit core was not injured at all. Servants were made of magical power. Whether it was blood, bones, or anything else, they were all made of magical power. As long as the most important spirit core was not destroyed, and there was enough magical power, then the servant would not leave. Generally speaking, when a servant was injured, they would replenish their mana from their master. Although Tristan was a servant summoned by the Lion King, his master was not the Lion King. He was a servant summoned by the Holy Grail without a master. Not only Tristan, but all the Knights of the Round Table, including Tristan, had no followers. The only reason they were under the Lion King was because they were King Arthur's knights. If they wanted to rebel, the Lion King would not have used a command charm to control them. This was also the reason why the Lion King allowed the knights to make a choice in the beginning. It was because the Lion King was not their master, so they had the right to choose for themselves. To become the King's sword in the Lion King's hand, or to become the Imperial sword that stabbed the Lion King. Some people chose to become the Lion King's sword, and some people became the Death Admonishers. After that, the Lion King's sword slaughtered the Death Admonishers who held the Imperial sword. Therefore, as the Lion King's blade, Tristan wasn't the Lion King's follower. In addition, he didn't have the means to replenish his mana. Therefore, even if his spiritual core wasn't damaged, he could only leave the stage. Are you going to save me? Tristan asked in confusion. Wuming nodded as a matter of course. Since your spirit core is not injured, then as long as I provide you with mana, you can recover. However, Tristan's face was still full of confusion. Lord Varen, you've defeated me, so of course I'm yours to deal with, but please don't try to use me to deal with my king. If you do, I'll use my noble phantasm to kill myself in an instant after you heal me. The reason why Tristan chose to stand on the Lion King's side was because he was also the source of King Arthur's tragedy. Although his joke in his previous life was not the direct cause of King Arthur's death, King Arthur's death was also related to Tristan. Therefore, in this world, Tristan decided that no matter what, he would stand on the Lion King's side and completely become the Lion King's sword. Wuming, who had already guessed Tristan's thoughts, naturally would not let Tristan deal with the Lion King. You and I are also colleagues. I don't need to use my colleagues to deal with my king. I need your strength only to get you to help me seize the Holy Grail from the Sun King in the west. That's right. Although Wu Ming felt that he also had the ability to seize the Holy Grail from the Sun King, he had now discovered Gadatsi's trace. When Wu Ming and Tristan were fighting, Wu Ming discovered Gadatsi hiding in the distance because he was constantly moving. Why did Wu Ming come to this singularity? Wasn't it to help Gadatsi repair the singularity? And why did Wu Ming go to the desert in the west to find the Sun King? Wasn't it to obtain the Holy Grail? And the Holy Grail was to give it to Gadatsi so that they could repair the singularity. By the way, it could also stop Artoria's stubborn thoughts. When the singularity was repaired, even the gods would not be able to affect this place. After all, the era had eliminated the gods, and the goddess Lungaminiad would also be eliminated by the era of repair. Although Artoria's change also attracted a lot of Wu Ming's attention, Wu Ming was not a person who put the cart before the horse. His primary goal was still to help Gadatsi repair the singularity. And now that he had coincidentally found Gadatsi, Wu Ming would definitely act together with her. And looking at the direction where Gadatsi and the others were heading, it seemed that they had just walked out of the desert, so Wu Ming was not sure if they were going to return to the desert. Therefore, Wu Ming now needed a helper. I need you to go to the desert and wait for orders to prepare for me to seize the Sun King's Holy Grail. Wu Ming's words made Tristan ponder. As the loser, he was not killed by the other party, so he would not be a knight if he did not return the Holy Grail. And the other party did not do anything against the Lion King, so it seemed that it was acceptable. Wu Ming's next words were the last straw that broke the camel's back. Don't forget, the Sun King is also the Lion King's enemy. If you can help me eliminate the Sun King, then you will have done something that cannot be ignored. I accept your proposal, Lord Villo. Chapter 687. Tristan's surrender made Wu Ming nod in satisfaction. Then, Wu Ming and Tristan signed a contract. Wu Ming would provide Tristan with a large amount of mana to support his own recovery, and the price was that Tristan would temporarily become Wu Ming's subordinate. Wu Ming could order Tristan to do anything, but he couldn't order Tristan to do anything that was disadvantageous to the Lion King. This contract was two-way. Whether it was Wu Ming or Tristan, once they violated the contract, they would be counterattacked by the contract. Even so, this contract was still disadvantageous to Tristan. Firstly, the contract only required Wu Ming to provide mana, while Tristan had to listen to Wu Ming's orders. In comparison, the contract was quite disadvantageous to Tristan. Secondly, even if there was a counterattack from the contract, with Wu Ming's strength and means, Wu Ming wouldn't be in any situation at all. And if Tristan were to be counterattacked by the contract, the destruction of his spirit core would be the least of it. If it was more serious, Tristan's spirit foundation would collapse, and he would be sent to the Martyr's Palace. However, this couldn't be helped. Who asked Wu Ming to be the strong? The strong wouldn't be bound by rules. Only the weak Tristan would be bound by the contract. This was the case in all aspects. After establishing a mana link with Tristan and providing Tristan with a large amount of mana to recover, Wu Ming looked at the pile of rocks not far away. In the battle just now, Wu Ming inadvertently found the hiding place of Gadatsi and the others. It should be there. Wu Ming was about to speak, but he suddenly thought of something and stopped Wu Ming. Then, Wu Ming snapped his fingers mischievously. A black-purple ripple appeared in the air above the pile of rocks. Then, a few large rocks that Wu Ming got from somewhere fell out of the black-purple teleportation gate. Senior, watch out. Matthew's scream was the first to be heard. Those over there, please come out. Wu Ming deliberately lowered his voice and spoke to Gadatsi and the others in a rough voice. Although Tristan was puzzled as to why Wu Ming would change his voice to speak to the few hidden figures, he was still considered Wu Ming's subordinate after all. Therefore, he obediently shut his mouth and used the mana provided by Wu Ming to repair his body. Although Gadatsi's group had hidden themselves well in the beginning, due to Tristan constantly changing positions during his fight with Wu Ming, Tristan had long since discovered Gadatsi's group. But at that time, Tristan had to deal with Wu Ming first, so he didn't care about them. On Gadotzi's side, Matthew protected Gadotzi and Da Vinci with his shield. The surroundings were filled with scattered rocks that smashed onto Matthew's shield. Matthew put down his shield and looked at Gadotzi uneasily. "What should we do, Senior? The other party seems to have discovered us." Because Wu Ming had added magic power to his words, Wu Ming's words sounded like he was whispering into the ears of Gadotzi and the other two. Because of this, whether it was Matthew or Gadotzi, they had already discovered that the other party's voice was not Wu Ming's. "Dear Da Vinci, what should we do now?" Gadotzi looked at Da Vinci in a panic. The reason why Gadotzi asked this was because Da Vinci did not show the slightest panic. "Since the other party has discovered us, then let's go out." Da Vinci smiled lightly. After all, what else could they do other than go out? They didn't have any way to leave in an instant, so they could only go out and face the difficulties. Therefore, Gadotzi, Matthew, and Da Vinci walked out from the pile of rocks. The three of them approached Wu Ming and Tristan. Then Gadotzi spoke first. That I'm sorry. Didn't mean to hide. You don't have to explain." But he suddenly interrupted Gadotzi. Then, Wu Ming looked at Tristan, who had recovered and was able to stand up. "Go to the desert and wait for orders. If possible, find a place to completely recover your spirit base." At this moment, Wu Ming's voice was still rough. "Yes, Sir Villo." Tristan responded and walked towards the west. Since the deal had been made, Tristan would obediently abide by it. After all, this was a night. Tristan looked at Gadotzi and the other two vaguely. He had more or less guessed the other party's identity. However, he did not have the chance to return to the Holy City for the time being, so he could not report this news. However, Tristan did not think that a mere human master could affect the Lion King, so there was no need to be too concerned. Shaking his head, Tristan sped up and headed towards the desert area in the west. Gadotzi and Matthew watched the cold-looking night leave. That night with the strange bow should be Tristan. Suddenly, Da Vinci spoke. "Wait, Da Vinci, what are you doing?" Gadotzi looked at Da Vinci in panic. Matthew also moved his shield and prepared for battle. At this moment, Gadotzi and Matthew were extremely nervous. Past experience told Gadotzi and Matthew that if the conversation was not careful, it would definitely turn into a battle, and they did not seem to be able to defeat the knight in front of them. Listening to the other party's voice, the other party was not the person they knew. Even if the other party was related to the person they knew, they would have to talk slowly. However, Da Vinci spoke as if they were familiar with each other. How could this not make Gadotzi and Matthew worried? You two don't have to worry. Didn't you see that the other party didn't do anything?" Da Vinci pointed at Wu Ming indifferently. Gadotzi and Matthew looked at Wu Ming and found that the other party did not do anything. Although there was indeed no movement, Gadotzi still quietly whispered in Da Vinci's ear. "But, Da Vinci, it's better to be careful. Tachika," whispering to the people around you before you can distinguish whether the other party is an enemy or a friend. Such behavior will cause the other party to be dissatisfied. Besides this voice is Gadotzi and Matthew both looked at Wu Ming blankly. Because this time, Wu Ming used his own voice. "Assassin, Senior Sira?" Gadotzi and Matthew both shouted in surprise. Wu Ming knowingly took off the helmet and clipped it to his waist. The knight who took off the helmet revealed the face that Gadotzi and Matthew were familiar with. Then, the face smiled and greeted Gadotzi and Matthew. "Long time no see, Tachika, Matthew." Chapter 688. Gadotzi excitedly ran towards Wu Ming. Matthew, who was worried, wanted to follow her, but was stopped by Da Vinci. Matthew looked at Da Vinci in confusion, but Da Vinci just smiled and shook his head at Matthew. Although Matthew still wanted to accompany Gadotzi, Gadotzi had already run to Wu Ming's side. Gadotzi suddenly pounced into Wu Ming's arms. The moment before Gadotzi pounced in, Wu Ming turned his helmet into magic power and through the meteor silver. The golden ripples instantly engulfed it. Due to inertia, Wu Ming hugged Gadotzi and spun around a few times, successfully making Gadotzi laugh. While assassin, I missed you so much, ha ha. Wuming hugged Gadotsi and spun a few more times, then stopped and put Gadotsi on the ground. Wuming then stroked Gadotsi's little head as if he was looking at a little sister who needed love. I missed you too, Tachika. At this time, Gadotsi's watch suddenly emitted the sound of Roman's crazy in disbelief. Are you for real? Are you really Sierra? This is unbelievable. If I didn't hear wrongly, the knight just called you a Villo? Could it be that you are King Arthur's first knight of the Round Table? Villo Sierra? But that's impossible. You are obviously Sierra of Ulster. How could you become King Arthur's knight? The timeline doesn't match at all. Then, Roman seemed to have thought of something, and his voice stopped abruptly. This made Gadotsi a little confused for a moment, thinking, what's wrong with the doctor? Why did he suddenly stop talking after a long speech? Wuming could not help but laugh at Roman's reaction. Ever since he knew about Gidea's identity, he was completely sure of Roman's identity and did not have the slightest doubt. And since Roman was that person, it was not strange that he knew about Wuming. But Roman could not show it. After all, he was just an ordinary human. Well, I forgot, you are a mysterious guy who has always been alive. If that's the case, then it's understandable that you left a record in history across time. Ah. Roman laughed. It had to be said that Roman's answer to himself was rather perfect. If he had been alive all this time, he would have been able to recover from his previous shock. It seems that this guy also enjoys being a human. Wuming could see that Roman's surprise for Wuming was indeed real. This meant that the other party did not rely on his previous strength, but relearned as a human. But how much effort did you put in that ordinary people can't even catch up with you? Roman Ace Man. Wuming silently glanced at Gadotsi's watch that sent out Roman's communication sound. He seemed to see the young man with a helpless smile on his face. On the other side, Gadotsi just reacted from a sudden realization. Indeed, Wuming once generously admitted that he was still alive, so Wuming was likely to exist in human history a long time ago. Then, it was not strange that Wuming had multiple names and legends. Then, Gadotsi hugged Wuming again with a happy face. As expected of Assassin, you're still very powerful. Wuming also smiled and hugged Gadotsi, but his eyes were thinking about something. It seems that I guessed correctly. Wuming thought in his heart. Wuming obviously did not have much contact with Gadotsi, at most only a few times, but just these few times raised Wuming's favorability in Gadotsi's heart to the extreme. On the other hand, Gadotsi's favorability in Wuming's heart also rose to a high level. But whether it was Gadotsi or Wuming, their favorability in their hearts was not the kind of love between a man and a woman, but the kind of affection similar to family. To Gadotsi, Wuming, who appeared several times to help her, was like her brother, and to Wuming, Gadotsi was like a younger sister who encountered trouble and needed help many times. And the reason why there was such a feeling, Wuming guessed that the problem was with Gadotsi. However, even if he had guessed that the problem was with Gadotsi, Wuming did not find any abnormalities with Gadotsi. When Gadotsi threw herself into Wuming's arms, Wuming had already probed Gadotsi's body. But unfortunately, Gadotsi was completely an ordinary magician, and the kind that was at the rookie level. Except for some magic in the command spell in Gadotsi's hand, Wuming did not find any other mystery on Gadotsi's body. However, the most unusual thing was that there was no abnormality. Wuming raised his head and looked at the huge aperture that had always existed in the sky. Could it be that Gidea did something to Tachika? As soon as this thought appeared in Wuming's mind, it was immediately cut off by Wuming himself. There was no other reason. How could a contractor who had formed a fate with many heroic spirits be affected by Gidea? Don't underestimate the star crystallization of human faith, and don't underestimate the miraculous existence called heroic spirits. Senior, at this time, Matthew's voice came from behind Gadotsi, which was in front of Wuming. He saw Mashu holding her big shield and running towards him, while Da Vinci was following behind her at a leisurely pace. By the way, Da Vinci walked over. Matthew. Gadotsi broke away from Wuming's arms and waved at Matthew. After Matthew came to Gadotsi's side, he began to greet Wuming. Senior Sierra, long time no see. However, Wu-Ming smiled and shook his head. Call me Senior Villo, Matthew. Huh? Villo? Senior? Matthew was taken aback, and there was a slight change in his eyes, but he quickly recovered. Matthew looked at his hand, somewhat at a loss. Matthew could feel that Galahad, who was sleeping in his body, woke up for a moment, but then fell asleep. Maybe it's because Galahad, who was sleeping in your body, suddenly woke up because she saw the person she respected the most. Da Vinci, who was a step behind, explained slowly. Hey. Is Senior Sira really the knight of the round table? Villo, Sira, Ed? Matthew was shocked. The answer to Matthew was Wu-Ming's familiar, yet unfamiliar words. It's the real deal, Junior. Ahem. Here, I'll explain to everyone the issue of the address between Galahad and Villo. No matter in any records, Galahad always called the Villo Senior. Da Vinci kindly reminded. So, I have two seniors, Mashu said with excitement and uneasiness. However, Wu-Ming shook his head. Matthew, as a subservient, Matthew does have two seniors, but you have to remember, as Matthew Gillett, you only have one senior, and that is Tachika Fujimaru. After all, only Galahad Sr. was Villo Sira Ed, and Matthew Gillett Sr. was Gadotsi. Matthew and Gadotsi, who heard Wu-Ming's words, were slightly touched. Just listen to Assassin, Matthew. Gadotsi said to Matthew with a smile. Facing Gadotsi and Wu-Ming's smiling faces, Matthew nodded heavily. Yes, Senior. Chapter 689. Then, the genius Da Vinci, who didn't know how to break the atmosphere, personally broke the beautiful atmosphere. All right, it's about time to talk about the Villo. First of all, why did the Villo pretend that he didn't recognize us? Da Vinci's words made Roman, who had been listening through Gadotsi's watch communicator, react. Yeah, I would have forgotten if Da Vinci didn't mention it. Why did you change your voice and pretend that you didn't recognize us? Although Roman was good at judging the situation, since Da Vinci had broken the atmosphere, he had nothing to worry about. That's right. I really thought that it was going to turn into a battle again. Phew, Gadotsi said doubtfully and finally let out a sigh of relief. Also, the falling rocks were done by Senior Villo, right? Then why did Senior Villo do that? Matthew also looked at Wu-Ming doubtfully. Cough. Actually, I had my reasons for doing that. Wu-Ming coughed without changing his expression and then became serious. Could it be that you wanted to hide your relationship with Chaldea in front of the knight? Roman assisted Wu-Ming by forcefully explaining. Yes, that's right, that's it. Wu-Ming immediately nodded and admitted without hesitation. Thinking about it carefully, Assassin did recognize us after the knight left and used her real voice to talk to us. Gadotsi also pondered and said, That's right. After all, if I directly used my own voice, Tachika would definitely recognize me. Moreover, the falling rocks were to prevent Tristan from suspecting you. That's why I did that. Wu-Ming immediately took advantage of the situation and started to talk nonsense. After all, he couldn't possibly say that he was just being impulsive. Other than Da Vinci, who looked at Wu-Ming with a smile, whether it was Matthew, Gadotsi, or Roman, who wasn't here and only understood the situation through the conversation, they all believed Wu-Ming's words. Wu-Ming hurriedly tried to muddle through, so he quickly diverted everyone's attention. Speaking of which, did you guys come out from the desert? From the position of Gadotsi and the other two, the probability of them coming out from the desert was very high. Gadotsi nodded as Wu-Ming expected. Yeah, we were teleported directly into the desert by spirit particle transference. Gadotsi then told Wu-Ming their experience. First, they entered the desert, causing the desert's enchantment to cut off the connection between Gadotsi and Chaldea. After that, Gadotsi and the others encountered the desert's divine beast, Sphinx. After defeating the Sphinx, Gadotsi and the other two naturally had to explore. After all, they couldn't contact Chaldea at that time, so they couldn't just sit back and wait for death. Fortunately, Da Vinci followed them. After searching through Da Vinci's equipment, the three found a water source and a city. On the way to the city, the three encountered a large group of Sphinx. However, these Sphinx didn't give Gadotsi and the others a headache because a group of men in black repelled the Sphinx group. After that, because the men in black looked a bit like bad guys and they really caught a sleeping woman, Gadotsi and the others came to her rescue. After that, the woman woke up and thought that they kidnapped her, so they fought with the other party again. Fortunately, Mr. Lucius came to help. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to go. Matthew gasped for breath. Lucius. Wuming made a puzzled sound. Yes, that's a knight. He happened to pass by when we were misunderstood by Miss Nidicles and saw the truth. So he came out to help us clarify the misunderstanding. Matthew nodded. So where is he now? Wuming wanted to meet this knight named Lucius. He always felt that he was also a key clue. Mr. Lucius left after he helped us. We don't know where he went, either. Matthew's words disappointed Wuming a little. By the way, Nidicles is a pharaoh's follower. After we cleared up the misunderstanding, she brought us to the shrine in the desert. Gadotsi immediately changed the topic. Temple? Did you see the Sun King? Hearing Gadotsi say that they went to the temple in the desert, Wuming put his attention to Lucius aside. Yes, Nidicles is not the owner of this desert. So after we passed Nidicles' test, she took us to the temple to meet the owner of this desert. It should be the Sun King you mentioned. Gadotsi answered Wuming. Wuming was not surprised that Nidicles was not the owner of this desert. If she was the owner of this desert, she would not have been taken away in her sleep. Then, can you tell me who the other party is? Wuming looked at Gadotsi and the others seriously. Of course, assassin, you're being too polite. Gadotsi looked at Wuming with some resentment. Sorry. Wuming immediately patted Gadotsi's head and apologized. The head patting was still very effective on Gadotsi. At this time, Da Vinci answered Wuming's question. The other party is Ramses II. It's actually Ramses II, Wuming said with some surprise. There was no other reason, but because Ramses II was a little too powerful. The king, Pharaoh, who ruled the area of Egypt from the 13th to the 14th century BC, was both the son of the sun god and its incarnation. Moreover, Ramses II also built many buildings and even classified the previous buildings as his own. In fact, it made sense when he thought about it this way. Because Ramses II had a large number of buildings under his name, these buildings were sublimated into relics and created a large area of desert similar to an inherent barrier. Unfortunately, we did not find a second city in the desert. This desert was summoned together with Ramses II, not his temple. Da Vinci seemed to have seen through Wuming's thoughts and directly shattered Wuming's fantasy. Wuming was a little overwhelmed. I'm just kidding. In fact, Ramses II moved all the temples together, so you can't see other temples in other parts of the desert. Wuming narrowed his eyes and stared at Da Vinci. At this moment, Wuming felt that this guy was more mischievous than himself. In short, we saw Ramses II and learned that Ramses II has the Holy Grail in his hands. The most surprising thing is, according to Ramses II, he seems to know what happened to us at the previous 5 singularities, Gadotsi said with some surprise. However, Wuming was not surprised. After all, the other party was also considered a god, just like Artoria in the Holy City at this moment. Although Wuming did not ask Artoria, Wuming believed that Artoria must only know about Gadotsi. Then, why did you leave the desert? Is it because of Ramses II's banishment? Wuming hit the nail on the head. Chapter 690. After all, Gadotsi and the other two also needed the Holy Grail. In that case, to Ramses II, Gadotsi and the others were enemies. However, Wuming did not believe that the other party only expelled Gadotsi and the others. There must be other reasons. That was why Wuming asked. Ramses II only let Nidicles punish us. In fact, it was just a fight. Because we won, Ramses II did not make things difficult for us anymore. He even told us a lot of information. From this point of view, Ramses II's character was not bad. The content of the information was as Wuming expected. The Crusaders used the Holy Grail to summon Ramses II, and then were beaten by Ramses II. He even snatched the Holy Grail and summoned his temple in this huge desert, deepening the collapse of morality in this singularity. And the reason why we were expelled is mainly because of Da Vinci. Matthew looked helplessly at Da Vinci, who was smiling without the slightest self-reflection. Da Vinci personally analyzed how Ramses II came to this singularity and his subsequent actions. Then, Ramses II actually used Da Vinci's intelligence as an excuse to take Da Vinci as his concubine. Gadazzi said halfway and could not continue. Wuming also knew the reason. It was because this seemingly gentle big sister Da Vinci was actually a man. Yes, a man. Because of Da Vinci's genius idea, after he was summoned, he created a Mona Lisa face puppet spirit base. After that, he stuffed himself into this spirit base and became a woman, but his heart was still a man. Although Da Vinci did not care about gender, he had always cared about art, which was the beauty of the Mona Lisa. I rejected the pharaoh, and then he kicked us out, Da Vinci said with a smile. Although I didn't see it, I can almost imagine the scene at that time. Even Roman could not help but complain. You must have sternly rejected the other party with a serious look on your face. This was the only way to show Da Vinci's vile taste. Isn't that obvious? Mona Lisa is art. Art doesn't get married. But because of that, the other party shamelessly offered the Lion King and the Holy City in the East, Da Vinci said with a smile. This could be considered a blessing in disguise. According to Ramses II, the Lion King is the main culprit behind the accelerated collapse of human nature, Gadazzi said. As expected, Lily's actions also accelerated the collapse of the singularity. Wuming thought to himself after hearing Da Vinci's words. So, we decided to meet the Lion King first. Moreover, meeting the Lion King was not only because the other party was also one of the culprits who caused the accelerated collapse of human reason, but also because of Matthew. I'm sorry, Senior. It's all my fault. Matthew apologized to Gadazzi. She had always had a special feeling about the Lion King in the East, so Matthew suggested that they go and take a look. However, this seemingly selfish behavior made Matthew feel deeply uneasy. It's okay, Matthew. After all, I also want to meet the Lion King. Gadazzi didn't think that Matthew was wrong, and Gadazzi also had the intention of going to the Holy City to take a look. Matthew, you want to go to the Holy City to see the Lion King because of Galahad, right? Wuming asked. Yes, Mr. Villo, because according to Mr. Ramses II and Miss Niticles, I learned that the knights under the Lion King seem to be knights of the Round Table, Matthew explained. The Lion King who can take in the Knights of the Round Table. Is his real identity King Arthur? This made Matthew, who knew that the servant attached to him was Galahad, a little concerned. Your guess is right. The Lion King is King Arthur. I just came out of the Holy City and saw him. Wuming's words not only made Matthew sigh, but even Gadazzi, Da Vinci, and even Roman, who had not spoken and only listened, also sighed. The reason why Roman didn't speak was that he didn't know much about the situation before Gadazzi and the others left the desert, so he chose to listen. However, the Lion King used the Holy Spear. His body was developed, and the Holy Spear eroded the deified King Arthur. Huh? This made Matthew stunned. In other words, the other party is also a deity. Really, why do we always meet deity-level servants? Roman, who finally spoke, let out a sigh. Do you know about the recent saint selection held in the Holy City? Wuming thought for a moment and looked at the three. Saint selection? It seemed that they didn't know about it. Wuming nodded, then told the three of them what he knew about the saint selection, including the Lion King summoning almost all the knights of the Round Table, making the knights choose to kill each other, and using the Holy Spear to store pure humans to preserve human specimens, and the knights of the Round Table slaughtering humans who were not chosen. In short, Wuming told Gadazzi and the others all the information he could. This plan is too crazy. Isn't that abandoning almost all humans? Roman was the first to exclaim. The refugees just now were the saint selectors who were almost killed at the holy city gate, and the knight who chased the refugees was Tristan. It really is Tristan. Until now, when Wu Ming said it himself, Gadotsi and the others were completely sure that the knight with the bow was Tristan. Just like what Sira said, the other party is already a goddess, no longer a human. Da Vinci also let out a sigh. The reason why no one raised any doubts about King Arthur being a woman was because they already knew that King Arthur was a woman when they were at the Winterwood City Singularity, so they didn't have any doubts. So Tachika, Matthew, do you still want to go to the Holy City? Roman's solemn voice came from Gadotsi's wrist. Da Vinci and Wu Ming also looked at the two of them. Gadotsi and Matthew looked at each other, then nodded at the same time. Of course we have to go. Since King Arthur has changed, we have to defeat her, Gadotsi said with great emotion. Mr. Galahad entrusted his power to me, so I will also shoulder the responsibility of being King Arthur's subject. I must stop King Arthur. As the successor of the Round Table Galahad's power, Matthew also made choice. She stood on the opposite side of the king. Wu Ming also believed that if Galahad came in person, he would definitely make the same choice as Matthew. Since that's the case, let me accompany you back there. Chapter 691. What, is this really okay? Gadotsi asked in surprise. After all, Senior Villo, you came out because you have something to do. If you go back because of our capriciousness. Matthew sounded a little embarrassed. After all, if Wu Ming delayed something important because of accompanying Gadotsi, then Gadotsi and Matthew would feel bad. Then, Wu Ming stretched out his two clenched hands and placed them in front of Gadotsi and Matthew's heads. Immediately after, the two of them were flicked on the head by Wu Ming's finger that suddenly stretched out. It hurts. Gadotsi and Matthew covered their forehead and took 2 steps back. Although even Matthew felt the pain, the strength used by Wu Ming to flick Gadotsi and Matthew's forehead was different. After all, if he flicked Gadotsi's forehead with the same strength as he flicked Matthew's forehead, then Gadotsi's head would definitely be damaged. You two little idiots, what the hell are you thinking? My purpose is to find you. Why did Wu Ming come to this singularity? Wasn't it because he felt Gadotsi's summon? When I came to this singularity, I used the sword you gave to Mashu to summon her, but you didn't respond. Gadotsi protested. Mashu also subconsciously moved the seemingly ordinary knight's sword that had been fixed on her waist. Because she was a shielder, she had basically never used it before. Although this knight's sword looked ordinary, Wu Ming had used a special method to fuse the Holy Grail's blade of salvation with this knight's sword. Thus, as long as he poured mana into it, the blade of salvation would appear. From the information that Gadotsi now knew, Wu Ming was likely to have been summoned by the Lion King at this singularity, so he didn't respond to her summon. When you summoned me, I was busy in another world. I just came to this singularity a few days ago. Wu Ming, who saw Gadotsi's thoughts, immediately explained. Other worlds. Shouldn't other parallel worlds have entered a state of madness at this moment? Roman asked, puzzled. The other worlds I'm talking about are not the world we live in, nor are they parallel worlds of the world we live in. If you want to say it, you can think of it as a different world. After all, whether it was the box court world or several other worlds, for the people of this world, they could be regarded as different worlds. Sai, that's great. I also want to go to the different worlds to have a look. Gadotsi's eyes showed some intention. But before that, we need to repair our world first. Don't bite off more than you can chew, Da Vinci said, and copied Wu Ming and flicked Gadotsi's forehead. Whoa, why did Da Vinci flick my forehead when he kissed you? Damn it. In an instant, Gadotsi showed a tearful expression. By the way, I thought that Senior Villo came out to stop Tristan's pursuit of the refugees. Indeed, I didn't come out for these refugees. After all, I didn't know that they were being hunted. I was going to the desert to find the Sun King to retrieve the Holy Grail, and I accidentally saw it, so I stopped Tristan. Wu Ming responded to Matthew's words. After that, Wu Ming suddenly remembered something. By the way, about the servant in black, you should have seen the identity of the other party. Wuming was talking about smoky drunk Hassan. If Gadotsi and the other two had been watching, then they must have seen the figure of smoky drunk Hassan, and they must have seen the identity of the other party's servant. It's one of Hassan. Gadotsi nodded. Ah, yes, we also met a Hassan before. 100 Faces Hassan. Matthew suddenly remembered. The reason why they knew so clearly was very simple. The other party has the ability to clone himself. Except for the legendary 100 Faces Hassan, who has multiple identities and is proficient in various skills, I really can't think of anyone else. Da Vinci said, "You're talking about the men in black who kidnapped Notorious, right?" Wuming looked at Gadotsi and the other two helplessly. Gadotsi nodded, and because the other party had multiple numbers, they killed the group of Sphinx that Gadotsi and the other two encountered. Then, Wuming's expression became serious. It's not worth advocating to make a move without figuring out the situation. It's likely to turn allies into enemies. Wuming looked at Gadotsi and Matthew seriously. Wuming's preaching made Gadotsi and Matthew scratch their heads awkwardly. They also realized the seriousness of the problem. After all, in this chaotic singularity, no one could be said to be a good person. Whether it was the desert, the holy city, or the northern mountains, everyone was trying their best to deal with others for their own sake. Therefore, Gadotsi and the others, as outsiders, suddenly intervened and interrupted one party's plan, which undoubtedly made them enemies. It would be fine if the rescued party became the backer of Gadotsi and the others, but the problem was that Gadotsi and the others only saved the subordinates of Ramses II, and the Helios king also expelled them. This time, they were in a dilemma. However, from the fact that the Helios king only drove Gadotsi and the others away instead of killing them, it could still be seen that the other party was being merciful. After all, whether it was the pharaoh or the king of gods, Pharaoh, who had defeated the Crusaders, it would be a piece of cake for him to get rid of Gadotsi and the other two. Simply chasing them out was already repaying them for saving his subordinates. But in any case, the result now was that Gadotsi and the others still did not find an ally in this singularity. It was a big failure. By the way, since Hassan could defeat the Sphinx group that gave you a headache, how did you repel him? Wuming had a lot of doubts. After all, Gadotsi also said that dealing with the Sphinx before made them feel difficult. So how did Gadotsi and the others repel Hassan, who defeated the Sphinx group? Actually, this is the case, Senior Villo. When the other party saw my shield, he thought I was a knight of the holy city, so Hassan retreated directly. And now, Matthew understood that even if she said no, not many people would believe her. At least, that was what the patterns on her armor and the patterns on the shield in her hand told others. She was a member of the sacred city. The people of the holy city were King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. As the inheritor of Galahad's power, she was naturally regarded as a member of the holy city. However, those people didn't know that even the people of the holy city didn't know that they had such a subservient partner. After listening to Wuming's information about the Lion King for a long time, Gadotsi and Matthew were unlikely to join the holy city, and Gadotsi and the others had also offended Ramses II and Hassan. Therefore, whether it was the Sun King's desert forces, the Lion King's holy city forces, or Hassan's unknown forces in the northern mountains, under the current circumstances, Gadotsi and the others had no way to win over or join them. Are we going to have to fight alone in this singularity? Gadotsi's face was filled with shock and helplessness. Immediately afterward, Roman, who had been silent, spoke. In fact, because the collapse of this singularity is more serious, Chaldea is unlikely to give you much support. Next, Wuming also nodded, understandingly. So, unless there are other breakthroughs, you really can only fight alone, Tachika. Gadotsi made an ORZ pose. And just when Gadotsi and Matthew showed a discouraged look, Wuming gave them a chance to live. But if I'm here, then there will be no problem. Roman was silent. Gadotsi and Wuming might not know, But as an old employee of Chaldea, Da Vinci was very clear. Matthew could be said to be Roman's daughter in another way, because Matthew grew up with Matthew's attending physician, Roman. Sigh. Okay. Roman sighed and compromised. But we are completely understaffed. We can't just rely on the four of you to form a force. Roman's tone was full of melancholy. Regarding this problem, I think Sira should have a countermeasure. Da Vinci looked at Wu Ming with a smile. Wu Ming nodded as a matter of course. Since I made this suggestion, I naturally have a way. Then, Wu Ming looked at Da Vinci and emphasized, "For this body, call me Villo." Although Wu Ming was both Sira and a Villo, this spiritual base was summoned as a Villo, so it was better to call him Villo. Yes. Then, Villo, do you have any good ideas? Da Vinci affectionately called out Wu Ming's name. Deliberately ignoring Da Vinci's bad taste, Wu Ming smiled. It's very simple. Since we don't have enough people, then we could just call for help. Call for help? Gadazzi was confused. Why did it sound like a fight between hooligans? Then where do we call for help? Matthew raised a question. After all, there are currently 3 forces at this singularity, and they couldn't rope in any of them for the time being. Of course it's from another world. Wu Ming's words made Gadazzi and Matthew shout in surprise. Another world? Roman, who was among Da Vinci and Chaldea, had a thoughtful look. It's impossible to explain it clearly. Why don't I show you? Follow me, Wu Ming said as he walked in a certain direction. Gadazzi and Matthew looked at each other, then looked at Da Vinci, who nodded. You guys go first. My beloved car is still over there. Nodding, Gadazzi and Matthew followed Wu Ming. After walking for a while, Wu Ming stopped. We're here. Gadazzi and Matthew heard Wu Ming's words and looked around. There's nothing? Gadazzi was puzzled. Senior Villo, what do you want us to see? Matthew, who was also puzzled, also asked. The reason why Gadazzi and Matthew asked this question was because the place where Wu Ming took them was still a wasteland, which was no different from where they were before. Wu Ming was not in a hurry, as he said patiently. Take a closer look. Gadazzi and Matthew obediently listened to Wu Ming's words as they took 2 steps forward. This is... Gadazzi's pupils suddenly shrank. The ground in front of them seemed to be neatly dug by a cube-shaped object, and a huge square pit appeared in front of Gadazzi. Senior Villo, this is? Matthew turned to look at Wu Ming. I arrived here before, and when I arrived, I encountered a group of starving refugees. This is the trace I made to trap them. That's right. The place where Wu Ming took Gadazzi and Matthew to was the place where Wu Ming first arrived. Just Gadazzi and Matthew clicked their tongues. Wu Ming's move was already very powerful in their opinion. Then why did you bring us here? Gadazzi was puzzled. Was it just a show off? But that was impossible. Although they had only known each other for a short time, Gadazzi thought that the Wu Ming she knew was not a person who liked to show off. The reason why I brought you here is because I'm going to use this place as a base. Base? Chapter 693. Yes, it's a base. After all, if you want to establish your own force, how can you do it without a base? Ramses II had the Great Shrine, Artoria also had the new Holy City, and even the Hassans in the north had intricate mountains as cover. Therefore, establishing a base was a very important thing for a force. Although I don't think we'll be able to use it, Wu Ming muttered. Huh? Assassin, what did you say? I didn't hear you clearly. Gadazzi heard Wu Ming's muttering and asked curiously. It's okay. By the way, where did Da Vinci go? Wu Ming quickly changed the topic. Da Vinci went to find the car she made, Gadazzi replied. Made the car. This made Wu Ming confused. Could Da Vinci still make the car in this situation? Immediately, Matthew explained. Yes, Senior Villo, we got a lot of materials from a shrine in the desert, including some wood, and Da Vinci used the wood to make 2 working wooden cars. They left the desert in Da Vinci's car. After leaving the desert, Da Vinci noticed that there was a situation ahead, so he temporarily hid the car and walked with Gadazzi and Matthew to check the situation. So when Wu Ming saw Gadazzi and the other 2, there was no car around them. However, Wu Ming didn't know what to say about Da Vinci making a car with only wood. He could only say that Da Vinci was worthy of being called a genius. Don't worry about Da Vinci, assassin. How are you going to call helpers from the other world? Is it in the form of heroic spirit summoning? Gadotsi showed a strong desire for knowledge. Almost. Wu Ming nodded. Wu Ming was preparing to summon the helpers he needed in the form of a servant. Then, Wu Ming walked in front of Gadotsi and Matthew. Both of you, step back. I'm going to start the summoning ritual. Seeing how serious Wu Ming was, Gadotsi and Matthew couldn't help but gulp and step back. Wu Ming took a deep breath and exhaled. Buzz! With a humming sound, several golden ripples spread out around Wu Ming. Along with the appearance of the golden ripples, silver-white chains emerged from Wu Ming's golden ripples. These were all pseudo-heaven locks that Wu Ming had prepared to use as materials for the summoning array. With Wu Ming's current ability, it was a piece of cake for him to create a pseudo-heaven lock using advanced item creation. Whoosh! The chains swayed and made a clattering sound. One by one, the chains formed a variety of shapes above the pit in front of Wu Ming. There were arcs, right angles, straight lines, curves, all sorts of arcs, lines, and angles were pieced together by silence, as if they were building blocks. Gradually, countless pseudo-heaven locks connected one after another, forming a huge magic array. Finally, two pseudo-heaven locks extended from the magic array and came in front of Wu Ming. I hope it works, Wu Ming said, holding the two pseudo-heaven locks with both hands. Buzz! Immediately afterward, Wu Ming injected the magic power in his body into the two pseudo-heaven locks, and blue magic flames visible to the naked eye appeared on the two pseudo-heaven locks. And these two pseudo-heaven locks were connected to the magic array constructed by a large number of pseudo-heaven locks. So Wu Ming's magic power actually flowed into the magic array. Wu Ming continued to inject magic power, and the entire magic array composed of pseudo-heaven locks burned. The burning of the huge magic power caused the surrounding magic power to become restless. The atmosphere also became unstable, and it began to flow violently. In short, it produced some weak hurricanes in the surroundings. Senior, please be careful, Matthew said solemnly, while coming in front of Gadotsi and blocking in front of her with a shield. Although Matthew also believed that Wu Ming would not harm them, as the follower of his senior, Gadotsi, Matthew also had to do a good job of protecting her. At the same time, Roman's voice suddenly came from the communicator on Gadotsi's wrist. What are you doing over there? Doctor? What's wrong? Gadotsi raised her wrist to her chest and asked puzzledly. Chaldea's instrument shows that there is a fiercely burning magic power source next to you. Its magic power is comparable to the magic power consumed by multiple first-class servants to release their noble phantoms. Zzz, it's still going up. Zzz. Before Roman finished speaking, the communication between Chaldea and Gadotsi was disconnected. Hello? Hello? Doctor? Doctor? Are you still there, Doctor? Gadotsi shouted to her bracelet. Senior, it may be that Villo's magic array temporarily disrupted the surrounding magic power, causing us to be unable to receive Chaldea's magic signal. Matthew held a shield in front of Gadotsi, looked back at Gadotsi, and explained to Gadotsi. Hey, is it that serious? Gadotsi said and looked at Wu Ming, who was constantly instilling magic power into the magic array composed by the pseudo-heaven lock. What kind of existence was summoned with so much magic power? That thought appeared in Gadotsi's mind. Matthew was shocked by Wu Ming's current behavior, but the most important thing for her now was to protect her master, Senpai. However, one thing is certain, Senpai, we may have a very powerful helper this time. On Wu Ming's side, Wu Ming frowned and continued to instill magic power into the magic array. Wu Ming's main body's magic power was indeed boundless, and the magic power of Wu Ming's servant's body was much more than ordinary first-class servants. However, Wu Ming's servant's body was not his main body after all. There was a lot of magic power, but there would eventually be a limit to it. If the magic power of Wu Ming's servant's body was exhausted, then Wu Ming would comply with the rule that The servant has no magic power and cannot maintain the manifestation and withdraw. Now, Wu Ming's huge magic power had been consumed by 2/3. Wu Ming decided that if half of the remaining 1/3 of magic power couldn't summon what Wu Ming wanted, then Wu Ming would give up. After all, Wu Ming himself had to leave a guaranteed amount of magic power, then transfer it in one breath. Wu Ming gritted his teeth, divided the remaining 1/3 of magic power in his body into 2 parts, and extracted one part of the magic power and instilled it into the pseudo-heaven lock. Boom! The 2 pseudo-heavenly locks that Wu Ming was holding were broken, because there was too much magic power poured in an instant, and these 2 pseudo-heaven locks were also fake. The quality was not as good as the real thing, so they were completely shattered and turned into pure magic power. However, it didn't matter even if these 2 transmission links were broken, because the magic power that had been formed was still connected to the magic array. Even the magic power generated after the pseudo-heaven lock was absorbed and used as a burn for the magic array. And just when this huge amount of magic power was poured into the magic array finally lit up. Chapter 694. The light of the magic circle was like the sun, and Gadatsi couldn't help but close her eyes, cover her eyes with her hands, and curl up behind Matthew. Although Matthew, as a servant, was much better than Gadatsi, she couldn't help but shrink behind her shield, not daring to see what was happening in front of her. However, whether it was Gadatsi or Matthew, both of them had the same thought in their hearts. That was, Wu Ming succeeded. Gradually, the light of the magic circle gradually dissipated, and the pseudo-heavenly lock that constituted the magic circle also seemed to have lost its light and shattered all of a sudden. Gadatsi and Matthew, who heard the sound, couldn't help but poke their heads out from behind the shield, looking forward curiously. The 2 of them didn't return to their senses for a long time. In the sky directly in front of the magic circle composed of the pseudo-heavenly lock, there was a behemoth floating at this moment. The floating island was like a giant tree floating silently in the air. The blood-red roots that were filled with the smell of blood floated in the air like a turf. Instead of leaves, there was a dazzling blue-green crystal. However, this guy was not a tree, but a fantasy species that could move freely and look like a floating tree, Abenheim. However, its huge size, coupled with the height of the floating island, gave people the impression that it was a mountain range rooted in the earth. If it weren't for Gadatsi and Matthew being close to it, they would have thought that the floating island was a mountain. Anyway, the diameter of the floating island was completely immeasurable by the eyes of Gadatsi and Matthew. Both of them even thought that the entire barren land around them was occupied by this floating island. However, the point was not here. What attracted Gadatsi and Matthew was the beautiful figures with wings that flew out of the leaves of the blue crystal. Maybe they were real angels. These angels were all in the shape of young girls, and they all had a peerless appearance. However, the strange thing was that these angels were all wearing sleeveless tops, panties with ribbons and pendants, and asymmetrical pants. Even their shoes and socks were asymmetrical. Although they were wearing clothes that didn't match, the golden ratio bodies of the angel girls were still perfectly displayed. Gadatsi felt that these angels already had bodies and faces that were comparable to Cleopatra and even Maeve, who were known for their beauty. Complex magic circles that looked like the halos of angels were placed above the heads of the angels. Perhaps the pair of white pigeon-like wings was the only thing the angels had in common. The angels flew out of the floating island and came to the position where the magic circle was originally formed by the pseudo-heaven lock. They spread their wings and hovered in the air with their eyes closed. Matthew had no idea how many angels there were in the sky, but in Matthew's opinion, the number of thousands had long exceeded the threshold. Perhaps it was more appropriate to say that there were tens of thousands of them. Among them, a beautiful green-haired girl who was closest to Wu Ming at the very front, who seemed to be the leader, slowly opened her eyes. Those eyes of hers, which looked like swords and shields crossing each other, made Gadotsi instantly see the contradictory feeling of death and protection. And as if it had caused a chain reaction, the moment the green-haired girl opened her eyes, all the angels behind her opened their eyes one after another. Countless eyes of swords and shields crossing each other were reflected in Gadotsi's eyes. This time, Gadotsi found another common point among the angels. All members of the Skywing race pay respects to the Lord. The green-haired girl opened her mouth and spread her wings as much as she could toward Wu Ming and lowered her head slightly. Once again, like a chain reaction, all the Skywings behind the green-haired girl said in unison, "Pay respects to the Lord." Countless pairs of wings spread out in the sky, and the countless wings were like a canopy that slightly covered the floating island behind them. The shattered pseudo-celestial shackles turned into motes of magical light that dotted the angels, adding a layer of mystery to the angels. Right after that, the floating island behind the angels seemed to come to life, the blue crystals all over it shaking like a window, reflecting the sun's rays. Wu Ming, who was not far in front of Gadotsi and Matthew, nodded in satisfaction. This gamble, which he had taken at the risk of exhausting his mana and losing his spirit base, had paid off. Silent Cry had successfully summoned Abenheim in his servant form, as well as all the Skywing species that numbered in the tens of thousands. However, it was reasonable to say that Wu Ming should not be able to use the dependence of one of the 12 avatars, which meant that Wu Ming should not be able to summon the Skywings. Although Wu Ming was currently in his servant form, it did not mean that he was completely a servant. Before becoming a servant, Vilo-Theranced, he was still a root dragon. Wu Ming had channeled part of the 12 avatars' abilities into the spirit base, but Wu Ming was afraid that he would attract Gidea's attention if he were too ostentatious. Gaia should also be in a heavily injured state at this moment, and Silent Wonder had confirmed that this singularity was not directly caused by the other party, but indirectly. In other words, the other party did not actually have control over this singularity. However, Wu Ming could not guarantee that the other party would not come after him directly. Wu Ming, who had yet to find his main body, did not dare to be so ostentatious. Therefore, Wu Ming channeled the weakened versions of the 12 avatars into the spirit base, but the price was that their power was greatly reduced, and each ability could only be used once. Wu Ming was able to summon the Skywing race and Abenheim from another world as a servant by using his one use, dependent to transform himself into a holy relic. As for why he summoned them in their servant form, it was because if they died in this world as servants, their main body in the other world would not die. Although the Skywings loved to fight and were not afraid of death, Silent Wonder did not want anything to happen to the children that Artesio had entrusted to him. Secondly, summoning them in their servant form was already the limit for Wu Ming. If he wanted to summon their main body in the other world, then Wu Ming would need some time to prepare. But what they lacked at the moment was time, so Wu Ming directly summoned the Skywings in their servant form. In fact, Wu Ming also wanted to summon Athena, Lancelot, and the others from the Godslayer world, as well as the god of disobedience who had signed a contract with him, but it seemed that the ability that Wu Ming injected into the spirit base was a little too weak, and it could only summon people from one world at a time. What Wu Ming needed now was more people, so Wu Ming chose the Skywings, which had more people, instead of the god of disobedience, which only had a few people. In short, Gadotsi and the others were no longer short of people, and the nearly 10,000 Skywings were enough. Wu Ming turned his head and looked at the two people behind him. Gadotsi and Matthew were now in a state of shock. How is it? These people are enough, right? Wu Ming asked with a smile. Chapter 695. Gadotsi and Matthew were speechless. All they could do was nod their heads. Wu Ming waved his hand at the Skywing species, indicating that there was no need for them to continue bowing. Whoosh! All the Skywings retracted their wings, which had been spread to the maximum extent, leaving only enough for them to fly. At the same time, they raised their slightly lowered heads. The canopy formed by their wings disappeared and was replaced by beautiful figures. Even so, none of the sky wings acted alone. They all hovered in the air like a well-organized army, waiting for Wu Ming's order to turn into a sharp blade and pierce the enemy's heart. Sensing the shock and threat that the sky wings brought, Gadotsi and Matthew believed that these young ladies had the ability to do so. And that was indeed the case. Even Wu Ming had to admit it. Arthas was truly a war god. The race he created completely embodied the characteristics of a warrior race. When they got serious, they were all qualified soldiers. Be it in terms of strength or their ability to listen to commands, the Skywings were definitely an army that all ambitious individuals would fight to have. Even the youngest and most lively, Gopril, was rather obedient. She was still hovering behind Azrael, though she would occasionally throw flirtatious glances at Wu Ming, which Wu Ming noticed. No, it should be said that Gopril was doing it for Wu Ming to see assassin. Are these your subordinates? Are you so elegant in another world? Gadotsi, who had finally reacted, excitedly tugged at Wu Ming's armored arm. Because Wu Ming was wearing armor, there was no need for her to tug at his sleeves. However, Azrael, who was closest to Wu Ming, narrowed her eyes and looked at Gadotsi with hostility. The reason why the Skywings were known as a race of lunatics was that they did not consider the consequences. The Skywings were a bunch of people who would humiliate their masters. Even if they could not beat them, they would still mercilessly attack them. To Azrael, Gadotsi's rude behavior was humiliating her mistress, and it crossed her bottom line. In an instant, Azrael appeared beside Gadotsi and slashed her magic scythe at Gadotsi. The entire process took less than a second. Clang! The scythe slammed into a shield engraved with a lion and a cross, causing Gadotsi to cover her ears. Ugh! Matthew, who was holding the shield, couldn't help but groan. Because of Azrael's strength, Matthew's feet had sunk deep into the ground. Matthew struggled to press his shield against Azrael's attack. Stand down, Azrael. They're my friends. Wu Ming looked at Azrael with some displeasure. He really did not expect Azrael to be so impulsive as to charge forward with her scythe. Although even if Matthew did not react to Azrael's attack, with Wu Ming here, Gadotsi would not be hurt. Azrael's behavior was still a little too much. Moreover, to kill off an ally as soon as she appeared was a little too much. My apologies, my lord. Azrael immediately canceled her magic scythe and floated to Wu Ming's side with an apologetic look. Even Azrael felt so guilty that she did not even have any quirky words. Are you all right? Tachika, Matthew? Wu Ming looked at Gadotsi and Matthew with concern. I'm fine. It's just that the impact just now was a little loud. Gadotsi helplessly pinched her ears. She felt that if the sound was a little louder, she would go deaf. I'm fine too, Vilos-senpai. As a subservient and a shield-bearer, Matthew's physical fitness was still good. At least, Matthew was able to withstand the blow just now. After that, Matthew showed a look of disappointment. I just didn't expect that Vilos-senpai's subordinates in the other world were so powerful. Although Matthew was indeed a noob, she had grown a lot after going through 5 singularities. Now she could be regarded as a second-rate top servant. But she still felt that Azrael's attack was a little difficult. Matthew was sure that if Azrael attacked twice more, his shield would be gone. In other words, Azrael had at least the strength of a first-rate servant. However, he still couldn't protect his senpai well. Thinking of this, Matthew sighed in disappointment. It's just that Azrael is one of the strongest Skywing species. If it were other ordinary Skywing species, it wouldn't be so exaggerated. Wu Ming comforted Matthew. Yes, Azrael was able to knock Mashu's shield out of her hands in 3 attacks, while the other Skywings would only need 5, 6, or even 7 or 8 attacks to knock Mashu's shield out of her hands. Indeed, it wasn't that exaggerated. Then, Wu Ming looked at Azrael. He was ready to punish her. What's the matter, Azrael? You shouldn't be an impulsive person, right? Wu Ming looked at Azrael, puzzled. Although he said that he was going to punish her, Wu Ming was not a bad person, so he was just asking. As the first prototype of the Skywing species, Azrael was originally the leader of the Skywing species when Arthas was not around. Her personality was also not as well as irritable as the other Skywing species. So how could she suddenly attack over such a small matter? It was not just Wuming who understood this. Azrael naturally understood this as well, which was why she felt guilty about her actions. As the commander of the Skywing species, not being able to control her emotions well was a failure. Azrael understood this very well. However, the Skywing species were a warlike, easily irritable, and easily excited race, so Azrael's impulsiveness was nothing. Whether it was Arthas, Wuming, or even Azrael herself, no one had stipulated that Azrael should go against her nature. After all, it would be too much to force someone to go against their nature. However, as the commander of the Skywing species, Azrael really should not have been so impulsive. After all, Azrael was a senior who had lived for more than 10,000 years. How could she be so impulsive like a young brat? Moreover, any Skywing species could tell that Gadatsi and Wuming had a good relationship, yet Azrael still attacked when Gadatsi was recklessly tugging at Wuming. Master, I don't know what's going on either. I feel like I'm very impulsive now, but it seems that at the cost of this, my various ability values have increased quite a bit. Meow, Azrael, who had just attacked, was very sure that her strength, speed, and even magic capacity had increased quite a bit. Wuming was taken aback, and he had some guesses in his mind. Then, Wuming looked at Azrael attentively, trying to see something. In the end, he really did see something. So, that's how it is. Chapter 696. So that's how it is. Wuming nodded. Assassin, did you see anything? Gadatsi asked curiously. Gudazi's behavior made Wuming couldn't help but laugh. After all, she had just experienced a life and death situation. Even after walking through the gates of hell, she could still act like nothing had happened. Could it be said that Gadatsi had a good mentality, or that Gadatsi had a big heart? Wuming shook his head and explained to Gadatsi. I saw Azrael's servant attribute. Servant attribute? Gadatsi and Matthew could not help but exclaim. Yes. Wuming nodded and looked at Gadatsi and Matthew. Matthew, let's not talk about it for now. I think that as a master, you should understand that a master can check the ability value and attributes of their own servants. Wuming had made it very clear, and Gadatsi now understood. It must be known that Wuming had summoned this angel, named Azrael in the form of a servant, and as a summoned servant, she naturally had a master. So who was Azrael's master? It was undoubtedly Wuming in front of Gadatsi. Therefore, Wuming could see the other party's ability value. Azrael was summoned as a berserker, so she has the berserk skill to sacrifice her rationality in exchange for an increase in ability value. However, because she was not a regular heroic spirit, Azrael did not lose her rationality, but it was not that she was not completely affected. Azrael just became a little impulsive. That was the reason why Azrael had suddenly become violent. Not only that, but the other Skywing species were all summoned as berserkers, Wuming said, looking at the Skywing species floating in the air. Unlike a senior like Azrael, many of the other Skywings have been deeply affected by the berserk effect. If one were to look carefully, they would discover that many Skywings had a hint of irritation in their eyes as they crossed their swords and shields. They had already been floating in the air for a while, and they had already developed quite a bit of arrogance, as if they were already impatient. However, his loyal heart still suppressed the negative effects of berserk. Sure enough, summoning all of them in such a hurry has created a drawback, Wuming said with some self-reproach. If Wuming was given enough time, he could guarantee that he could summon the Skywing breeds that were not affected by their class at all, unlike now, where the majority of the Skywing breeds he summoned were filled with arrogance. Fortunately, the strength of the Skywings was not suppressed. Instead, it was boosted by the berserk state. Generally speaking, after a heroic spirit descended in the form of a servant, its strength would be more or less weakened. After all, it was not its main body. However, the Skywing breeds were not heroic spirits, and Wuming had summoned them using his kin as a holy relic. For various reasons, the summoned Skywing breeds were not weakened at all, and all of them were summoned with their strength boosted by the Berserk state. Sigh. It feels so awesome. Godatsi looked at Wuming like a fangirl. Even Matthew kept nodding his little head to express his admiration for this senior Villo. At this moment, the sound of a car could be heard by Wuming, Godatsi, and Matthew. The sound of a car? Wuming was taken aback. Could it be that Da Vinci had driven over? Ah, it's Da Vinci's car. Matthew, who had already begun to observe, exclaimed. Wuming looked in the direction Matthew was looking, and Wuming saw a simple convertible car made completely of wood driving over. The person sitting in the driver's seat was the familiar face of Mona Lisa. Wuming looked speechlessly at the small car under Da Vinci. It was completely made of wood. Fortunately, this car is powered by magic. Wuming sighed. Otherwise, Da Vinci would not be a genius, but a god. If this car was not powered by magic, but by gasoline, Wuming would really have to bow down to Da Vinci, who had only used a few pieces of wood to build a modern car. This was as shocking as an ordinary high school student building a nuclear bomb in an ordinary laboratory. Hey, your genius Da Vinci is here? Da Vinci drove the car, while greeting Wuming and the others who had already approached. Looking at the wooden car, with a braking system better than any modern car, Wuming could only smile awkwardly. If Da Vinci was a businessman in modern times, he would definitely make a lot of money. Godatsi and Matthew nodded silently when they heard this sentence. When Da Vinci used wood to build this car in a very short time, we also had the same idea. After all, the things born from this guy's hands could completely replace modern products with the same performance. However, even so, Wuming always felt that even if Da Vinci became a businessman, others would definitely call him a black-hearted businessman. There was no other reason, it was just intuition. Oh, I was just wondering why there was suddenly a large amount of magic fluctuations here. It turns out that someone summoned a servant here. As a genius, Da Vinci saw the form of the Skywing species floating in the sky, including Azrael, at a glance. There were tens of thousands of angels here. All of them were servants, and they were not weak ones. Is it something that Villo did personally? It's really surprising. There are so many servants here. Are you the master of all of them? Da Vinci said jokingly, but Godatsi and Matthew now reacted and screamed. Hey. That's right. These are all servants summoned by Assassin Villo, alone, and Assassin Villo just said that she was their master. Doesn't that mean that these tens of thousands of strong servants are all supplied by Assassin Villo alone? How much magic does that require? Is Assassin Villo the reincarnation of the Holy Grail? You guys think too highly of me. Even I can't provide magic for tens of thousands of first-class servants at the same time. Wuming, who understood why Godatsi and Matthew were screaming, helplessly smiled and shook his head. Because I used a special method to summon them. So, I only have a master-slave relationship with them. Whether it's the magic to maintain the present world or the magic to fight, they provide it all themselves. The magic I used before is stored in their bodies. What do you think Wuming used so much magic for? How could it be used just for summoning? The magic was distributed to the tens of thousands of Skywings and Abenheim. So that's how it is. Godatsi and Matthew breathed a sigh of relief. But doesn't that mean that Villo's magic is comparable to tens of thousands of servants? Da Vinci tilted his head and asked curiously. Hey. Godatsi and Matthew screamed. Chapter 697. A few minutes later, Godatsi and Matthew calmed down. Yes, what else could they do but calm down? Hugging Wuming's thigh and shouting, "Big boss, please take me along." In short, whether it was Godatsi, Matthew, or Da Vinci, after experiencing this incident, they clearly realized the horror of Wuming's EX-level magic attribute. No wonder Assassin made a holy grail for him. This was from Godatsi. Although the holy grail that Wuming created back then was only used to provide mana. That was already very shocking. Alright, in addition to the shock of Wuming's magic attribute, Godatsi also reconnected with Chaldea. Gadotsi and Matthew told Roman the reason for the disconnection and the reason why nearly 10,000 servants appeared. Then, a scream comparable to Gadotsi and Matthew came from Gadotsi's bracelet communicator. What? Gudazi disdainfully stretched her arm as far away as possible. If she could, she really wanted to throw away the communicator that was used to contact Roman, because Dr. Roman was really too noisy. In the past few months, Roman's mood has been fluctuating a lot. He always likes to shout. As a doctor, Roman knew that it was not good for his health. But he couldn't help it. Since he met Wuming, his heart was often stimulated. How is this possible? Villo is now in the servant state. Let's not talk about the limitations of summoning servants from another world. Just to maintain the existence of nearly 10,000 servants, even Crowncaster can't provide the magic needed in an instant. Roman, who was in Chaldea, looked at the number of servants displayed on the big screen. He was completely crazy. At this moment, there was only one thought in his mind. This was way too freakish. Hey, doctor, how do you know that Solomon can't come up with so much magic? Gadotsi expressed doubts about Roman's words. Although they only met once in the fifth singularity, how did the doctor know that Solomon's magic was not comparable to Wuming's? Clang. The sound of someone falling from the chair came from Gadotsi's bracelet communicator. Da Vinci, who had already imagined Roman's embarrassing appearance, covered his mouth and laughed. That's what I told Roman when I went to Chaldea. Wuming instantly mediated for Roman. No, that's right. When Wuming came to Chaldea, he told me that Solomon's magic is not as good as mine. In the control room of Chaldea, Roman helplessly got up from the ground and sat again. By the way, now that we have the manpower, what are you going to do next? Patting his face, Roman forced himself to be alert. On Gadotsi's side, after hearing Roman's words, everyone looked at Wuming. After meeting Wuming, Gadotsi and Matthew had already regarded Wuming as their backbone. As for Da Vinci, she just thought it was fun and went along with Gadotsi and Matthew. I originally wanted to summon Azrael and the others and build a base here. Wuming glanced at Azrael, who had returned to the sky wings, and then pointed to the huge pit beside him. But I've successfully summoned Abenheim. Since that's the case, there's no need to build a base. Because Wuming had never tried to summon an otherworld's dependent in the form of a full moon, he was not confident. Then, Wuming took a gamble. Not only did he successfully summon the Skywing's servant clones, but he also summoned Abenheim's servant clones. Because they were servant clones, Wuming did not need to worry about the Skywings and Abenheim situation in their own world. This was because what their clones experienced in this singularity only happened in an instant to their main bodies. Assassin, do you mean Abenheim, the giant tree floating in the air? Gadotsi pointed at the giant tree with blue crystal-like leaves and red trunks, which had already risen quite a bit and were floating in the air. It's Abenheim, but it's not a tree. It's a real fantasy breed. Fantasy breed? Roman exclaimed from Gadotsi's wristband communicator. What's that? Gadotsi did not know. It's a general term for creatures recorded in myths and legacies all over the world. Their existence itself is mysterious. Even in the magic world, they are rarely discovered, Da Vinci explained. Senpai, fantasy breed, is simply an extinct creature that no longer exists in our world. The evil dragon Fafnir we encountered in France can be classified as a fantasy breed. In order to make Gadotsi understand better, Mashu, who was in charge of supplementing, gave an example. In other words, fantasy breeds are actually very rare creatures. Gadotsi felt that she understood. Something like that. Abenheim is a little different from the fantasy breeds of this world, but it's not much different. So, there's no need to know too much about it. You just need to know that Abent is also a powerful servant, Wuming concluded. Wuming then continued. Abent was summoned as a rider, but Abent is actually in existence similar to a mount. Azrael and the others usually live on Abent's body. That's interesting. Gadotsi was intrigued by Wuming's words. You can visit it whenever you want, but we need to make a plan now. Wuming's words made Gadotsi nod quickly. Because Aben itself is a flying fortress, and Azrael and the others are also a powerful combat race, the Skywing species. So, there's no problem with manpower and combat power. Skywing species? Matthew looked at the angels still floating in the sky, but he did not underestimate them. Azrael's previous attack was still fresh in Mashu's memory. I really couldn't tell that these cute girls are combat race. Da Vinci smiled as he evaluated the Skywing species. I'll accept Da Vinci's praise for my Skywing species. Now, I'll talk about my plan. Wuming became serious. Let's not worry about the mountain folk in the northern mountains for now. As a new force, the Lion King and the Sun King on the east and west will definitely be on guard, and I don't think they want to have another enemy for no reason. So, our new force will send an ambassador to negotiate with the Lion King and the Sun King. In this way, so we can see the Lion King legitimately. Chapter 698. Gadotsi had an expression that said, "I've already guessed it. Have you become smarter, Tachika?" Wuming teased. "I'm not stupid." Gadotsi pouted and protested to Wuming. "Tachika, I'll leave the task of going to the holy city to you. I'll go directly to the temple of the Sun King. After all, we must get the Holy Grail, and Matthew wants to see the Lion King, so it's most convenient to split up like this." With that said, Matthew lowered his head in shame. "I'm sorry. Because of his willfulness, things have become troublesome, which is a little embarrassing for our cute little eggplant." However, Wuming pressed Matthew's little head. "No need to apologize, Matthew. It's better to say that it's because you have a heart like a newborn that Galahad will give his power to you. In that case, there's nothing wrong with you inheriting Galahad's power to fulfill his regret." Looking at Matthew's clear eyes, Wuming seemed to see Galahad. Although Wuming and Galahad didn't have much contact, Wuming and Galahad had a good relationship. The clarity in his eyes was shared by Matthew and Galahad. "I'm glad that Galahad was able to possess you. This is also a kind of luck for him." Compared to possessing a strange person, Wuming thought that Galahad's possession of a good boy like Matthew was the best result. "So, don't worry, follow your heart, and do what you think is right. Galahad will bless you." Finally, Wuming squatted down and stroked Matthew's little head. "Villo Sr." Matthew looked at Wuming's red eyes, and he didn't know what to say. At this time, a gaze was fixed on Wuming and Matthew, who were looking at each other. The two were taken aback, and then looked at the person who made such a gaze. Gadotsi puffed up her cheeks and stared at Wuming and Matthew unhappily. "I always feel like you two have entered an inexplicable two-person world," Gadotsi said slowly. How could that be, Senior? You misunderstood." Matthew quickly waved his hands. In Wuming's view, Matthew was not afraid of being involved with Wuming, but he was afraid that Gadotsi would misunderstand. "I didn't notice it before, but now I feel that the relationship between Gadotsi and Matthew is too good." Wuming thought in his heart. Gadotsi had an accident when she first came to Chaldea, so she didn't have many friends. Although Matthew had worked in Chaldea for a few years, because of Matthew's special identity, Matthew didn't have many friends. "Will something happen?" Wuming said with a little worry. And just when Wuming was distracted, Gadotsi had already arrived in front of Wuming. Hey, why are you distracted?" Wuming, who came back to his senses, looked at Gadotsi, who was already in front of him, and scratched his head in embarrassment. Sorry, I just thought of something. Are you thinking about the Holy Grail?" When Wuming said this, Gadotsi thought of the Holy Grail. After all, Wuming would go to the desert to find the Sun King to get the Holy Grail. After all, Gadotsi wasn't an unreasonable little girl. As a master who had experienced 5 singularities, Gadotsi had become very stable, so she immediately restrained her little temper. "Well, I guess so," Wuming agreed. After all, he couldn't just say, "I'm thinking about whether there will be an accident between you and Matthew." Indeed, Ramses II isn't an easy person to deal with. If you don't think of a plan, even you won't be able to take him down easily. Seeing that Wuming was in a state of speechlessness, Da Vinci stood up and relieved the pressure on Wuming. I'll be careful. What about you guys? When are you going to leave? Da Vinci looked at Gadotsi. After all, Gadotsi was the master. Well, my idea is to leave immediately. After all, I want to make Matthew feel at ease as soon as possible. As Gadotsi said this, she looked at Matthew. Senior, this moved Matthew quite a bit. Wuming nodded and then said, I think we should wait a little longer. After all, the Skywings have just arrived here and haven't made much of an impact yet. If the Lion King and the Sun King were to be wary of any random force, then they would be too degrading. Therefore, Wuming needed to let the Skywings create a certain reputation in this world, at least a reputation that the Lion King and the Sun King would be wary of before they could negotiate. After all, a weak country had no diplomacy. If they didn't show their strength, the Lion King and the Sun King might launch an attack in an attempt to destroy this new force. But Senior Villo, we don't have that much time. Matthew looked at Wuming in confusion. Wuming must know this. So why did he make such a suggestion? The reason was simple. Because, isn't the chance to become famous here? Wuming pointed to the sky. Gadotsi and Matthew looked at the sky curiously, but there was nothing. Sigh. No, there seemed to be a bright spot. Tachika. Matthew. There's a violent magic reaction in the sky, and the target is predicted to be where you are. Roman's warning voice instantly sounded from Gadotsi's wristband communicator. Although it can't withstand the magic power of the servant Villo just summoned, the magic power that has appeared in the sky has reached an unprecedented level. If it lands, not to mention Abante, you will definitely die. Gadotsi and Matthew screamed. Doctor, is it that serious? Matthew asked uneasily. In Chaldea's control room, Roman was operating the instrument with a worried expression, trying to make his judgment wrong. However, no matter how he estimated, the magic power that had appeared in the sky definitely had the power to destroy mankind. What? What should we do, Assassin Da Vinci's friend? Or we should retreat quickly? Gadotsi was panicking. It's useless. The attack from the sky is predicted to land in 10 seconds. Roman's helpless voice came from the communicator. Doctor, shut up. Matthew complained to Roman while looking at the light that was getting bigger and bigger. There was no doubt that if the light that was comparable to a meteorite landed, even Matthew's noble phantasm might not be able to withstand it. Ah, Tachika and Matthew, don't be so anxious. Can't you see that Villo's friend is not nervous at all? Gadotsi and Matthew could not help but look at Wuming. Sure enough, Wuming's expression said, It's finally here. Could it be? Gadotsi and Matthew had some guesses. Yes, it's to show off. Chapter 699. Wuming knew very well what the light in the sky was. It was an attack from Artoria's Holy Lance, Lungaminiad. The Lion King and the Sun King must have sensed the magic fluctuations from Wuming's summoning of nearly 10,000 servants. Even if the Lion King had fallen into a deep slumber after Wuming's departure, he must have been awakened by the powerful magic fluctuations. How could she allow others to sleep beside her bed? The Sun King alone was enough of a headache for Artoria. How could she allow another mysterious force to disturb her? Thus, Artoria threw the power of the Holy Lance into the sky, allowing it to freely fall and hit the enemies in the distance. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was comparable to an intercontinental missile. This was how the craters in the surrounding wilderness were created. The Holy Lance's attack had different power depending on the amount of magic the user injected. The craters in the wilderness were different in size due to the Holy Lance's power. According to Wuming's judgment, the target of the Holy Lance's attack was undoubtedly the Skywing species. Through his magic, Wuming could tell that the Holy Lance's attack could at least completely wipe out the Skywing species. Of course, that was if the Skywing species did not resist at all. However, how could the Skywing species not resist? Azrael, quickly prepare Sky Strike. Wuming ordered, and the Skywing species began to move. In truth, even without Wuming's order, the Skywing species were already restless. It was not that they were afraid of being killed by the Holy Lance's attack, but rather that they had been floating in the air without moving for a long time. What was the way to relieve the skywing species' restlessness? Naturally, it was to release the pressure, such as using Sky Strike. All skywing species prepare Sky Strike. After Wuming gave the order, Azrael began to issue orders to the skywing species. The impatient skywing species naturally got into formation very quickly. The skywing species arranged themselves in a pyramid-like formation in the sky, with Azrael at the top of the pyramid. As weapons of war, the skywing species had the ability to combine their strength. In other words, the skywing species had the ability to combine their attacks and release them together. In their world, because Wuming was holding Arthas back, the skywing species were unable to release the divine strike led by Arthas. They could only release the weaker pseudo-divine strike. However, its power was enough to suppress the forest goblin Zeroth Void Blessing, which was caused by the fantasy breed self-destruction, and the goblin's marrow explosion, which used the spirit marrow as a fuel and had a power comparable to a nuclear bomb. Naturally, Sky Strike was weaker than Divine Strike and Pseudo-Divine Strike, but Wuming did not think that Artoria needed to use Pseudo-Divine Strike this time. All the Skywings could use Divine Strike together. Most importantly, the Pseudo-Divine Strike was a killer move that the Skywing breeds poured all their energy into. Once the Skywing breeds used too much energy, their bodies would deteriorate, and their strength would be greatly reduced. Therefore, if they used Pseudo-Divine Strike now, the Skywing breeds would basically have no combat strength left. By the way, because Wuming summoned the Skywing breeds in the form of servants, the energy in the Skywing breeds' bodies was no longer spirits but magic power. However, this did not affect the Skywing breeds' ability to release their skills. Or rather, this should be called noble artifacts in their current form. A large amount of magic power gathered from the pyramid-shaped Skywing breeds, and a huge energy ball containing terrifying magic power appeared above Azrael. The magic energy ball and the Holy Lance's light were almost on the same line, and Azrael had already aimed the Holy Lance's attack. Unbelievable! The magic power of nearly 10,000 servants has all gathered together as if they had become a single servant. Roman, who was sitting in front of the big screen in Chaldea, exclaimed in disbelief as he looked at the data displayed on the screen. The magic power of nearly 10,000 servants? How terrifying is that? Gadotsi looked at the huge energy ball above the Skywing breeds and gulped. I'm afraid that's already an EX-grade noble artifact. Da Vinci smiled as he watched the activation of the noble artifact. As expected of Senior Villo's subordinates in another world. They're so strong. Matthew nodded solemnly. Only Wuming did not say anything. He just watched quietly, watching the Skywing breed's debut in this world. Sky Strike has been aimed. Azrael's expression became serious. As she spoke, the magic power leaking from the Skywing breeds, including her, instantly dissipated like the calm before the storm. Meanwhile, the eyes of the Skywings that were struck by the swords and shields changed, all of them turning into sharp, scarlet swords. The Skywing breeds had accepted Wuming's contract and obtained the power of protection. They had broken away from the original concept of war weapons and god-slaying weapons and became a normal race. However, this did not mean that the Skywing breeds were no longer god-slaying weapons. Now, the Skywing breeds had switched back to being god-slaying weapons, and because of Wuming's contract, they were even stronger than before after switching back to being god-slaying weapons. Tachika, Matthew, come behind me, Wuming said to Gadotsi and Matthew without looking back as he stared at the sky. Gadotsi and Matthew were stunned, somewhat confused. It's best to listen to Villo. If such a powerful magic attack is released, I'm afraid you'll all be blown away. Roman, who seemed to have seen the future, explained nervously. Gadotsi and Matthew were dumbfounded. Was it that dangerous? They could not even watch from the sidelines. Okay, be obedient. Da Vinci personally dragged Gadotsi and Matthew behind Wuming. Watch carefully. Their sky strike is enough to penetrate the sky. Wu Ming looked at the sky strike, which had turned into a sharp cone because the target was an individual and not a group. It was aimed straight at the Holy Lance attack that had already arrived above the Skywing breeds. Sky strike, there were no fancy words, just heavenly strike. Immediately afterward, Azrael's words made the Skywing breeds shoot out the Sky Strike energy body like a gun that had pulled the trigger. Boom! The Sky Strike energy body's instantaneous eruption stirred up the surrounding atmosphere and mana, forming a shockwave that surged toward the Skywing life forms and below. The ground was directly lifted, and even the air in the central area below the Skywing breeds was temporarily squeezed out for a moment. Wu Ming spread out one hand, and a pure magic barrier protected him and Gadatsi, Matthew, and Da Vinci behind him. At this moment, an extremely thick thunderbolt shot out from the west side of the desert. Chapter 700. Senior Villo. Mashu shouted, and she put up her shield, trying to use her noble phantasm to block the attack. Although she was not confident that she could block this attack that was comparable to the Holy Lance attack from Sky, she was confident that she could block it. Don't worry, Matthew. Wu Ming put a hand on Matthew's shoulder, indicating for Matthew to calm down. There was no doubt that it was an attack launched by the Sun King, Ramesses II. He wanted to take advantage of the Lion King's attack to deal with Wu Ming's forces together. If he succeeded, he would be able to eliminate a troublesome opponent, but if he failed, it would not matter. That was because this new force would have the qualifications to negotiate with the Lion King and the Sun King. And this so-called qualifications was exactly what Wu Ming wanted. Wu Ming turned to Abani Haim, who was standing beside the Skywings, and shouted, "Abanti!" At Wu Ming's command, Abanti, who had been accumulating power since who knew when, directly unleashed a large amount of pure magic power at the lightning attack from the desert. From the beginning, the crystal-like leaves on Abani's body had gathered a large amount of magic power, but because everyone's attention was on the Skywings, they subconsciously ignored it. Like refracting sunlight, Abani unleashed this magic power at the lightning attack launched by the Sun King from the desert in the west. At the same time, the sky strikes released by the Skywings also hit Artoria's Holy Lance attack, causing 2 explosions. Boom! First was Abani's magic power. It collided with the lightning attack at the border of the desert and the wasteland, causing a huge explosion like a nuclear bomb. Starting from the edge of the desert and the wasteland, which was the epicenter of the explosion, the land within a radius of several kilometers was covered in flames and light. Next was the sky. When the sky strikes of the Skywings collided with the light attack of the Holy Lance, it directly caused a firework-like explosion in the sky. The fireworks produced by the explosion scattered from the sky, and before they could fall to the ground, they were already consumed by the air. Whether it was the explosion of a nuclear bomb in the distance or the explosion of fireworks in the sky, Gadatsi and Mashu were both stunned. So powerful. Gadatsi slowly opened his mouth and said, "So this is the opportunity that Villo was talking about. You've really grasped it well." Da Vinci, who was not affected by the 2 explosions, said with a smile, "Thank you for the compliment, madam." Wu Ming smiled and nodded. Then, Wu Ming looked at Gadatsi and Matthew. "Now we have the right to negotiate. Get ready to set off. Tachika, Matthew." The 2 were stunned for a moment before their expressions became firm. Then, Gadatsi and Matthew nodded at Wu Ming at the same time. Yes, Gadatsi and the other 2 left. No, it should be said that Gadatsi, Matthew, and Da Vinci left with a small beast. Gadatsi and Matthew rode in the wooden cart driven by Da Vinci and headed east to the location of the holy city that Wu Ming had told them. When Wu Ming watched the 3 leave, he vaguely saw a small white beast come out of the supplies on the wooden cart and run into Matthew's arms. Wu Ming didn't know if it was an illusion, but he seemed to see the little beast, named Fufu, glance at him. "That little guy seems to be avoiding me." Wu Ming narrowed his eyes and looked at Da Vinci's self-made wooden cart that could no longer be seen. Whether it was in the burning Winterwood City, in America, or now in the Middle East, Fufu would not appear in front of Wuming. In other words, it was trying to avoid appearing in front of Wuming. Wuming was 80% sure that Fufu was definitely not as simple as it looked. However, Wuming was sure of one thing. The creature named Fufu was not malicious to Gadatsi and Matthew. On the contrary, Wuming even felt that Fufu was very close to Gadatsi and Matthew. Sure enough, Tachika is a magical existence. Wuming remembered what Zelik once said to him. Let's go and find that person who is connected to many stars and can resolve this crisis. That was what Zelrich had said at the time. The crisis should be this time's burning of humanity, and the person who has connections with many stars, I'm afraid, it should be Tachika, Wuming indifferently said. If it's me, I should be considered one of these stars, Wuming said as he looked into the distance. Master, what should we do next? Suddenly, an extremely pleasant and excited voice entered Wuming's ears. Gopral. Wuming curiously turned his head. This was undoubtedly Gopral's voice. Little Gopral, that was rude, meow. Azrael chased after her. Ma, what's the matter? It's rare for me to come to another world, so I have to have fun, Gopral excitedly somersaulted and impatiently said. Wuming helplessly smiled. Among the Skywings, probably only Gopral would be so bold to chat with Wuming. However, Wuming rather liked this sort of boldness. Looking at the other Skywings still floating in the air, waiting for orders, Wuming said. Let the other Skywings rest first, Wuming said. Even after becoming servants, the Skywings still retained the disadvantage of their race, which was that once they overused their elves, they would degenerate into a powerless infant state. And this disadvantage for the servants was that once their mana was exhausted, they would disappear and leave the stage. This was because Wuming had used a special method to summon the Skywings. Wuming did not need to provide mana for them to appear in the real world. The mana used to summon them was stored in the bodies of the Skywings, becoming the mana they needed to maintain the real world. Although this method was very convenient, the Skywings were unable to control the Holy City's mana. Thus, once the mana in their bodies was exhausted, they would immediately leave. The Sky Strike just now was unleashed by all the Skywings at the same time, and they did not use their full strength. There was no need for her to go all out for a mere show of strength, not to mention that doing so would cause her to leave the stage. Thus, Azrael did not have the Skywings invest much mana, only enough to offset the Holy Lance's attack. However, even if that was the case, the amount of magic power contributed by the Lion King was not a small amount. The attack launched by the Lion King with the Holy Spear was not a casual attack, but a powerful attack. After all, Artoria would not underestimate any potential enemy. As a result, the amount of mana that the Skywings expended when they released Sky Strike was already 1/10 of their total mana. Wuming felt that it was best to let them rest for a while. Yes, meow. Azrael released a burst of energy in the direction of the Skywings. When the Skywings floating in the air saw this, they immediately returned to Abinth. This was a command signal exclusive to the Skywings. So, Master, what do we need to do next, meow? Chapter 701. Azrael's question made Wuming fall into deep thought. To tell the truth, Wuming had no idea what to do with the Skywings' next course of action. It was none other than the fact that the Skywings had all been summoned at the Berserker rank. Azrael and Gopriel were still able to maintain their rationality because their strength was among the best among the Skywings. The other Skywings did not have the same strength as Azrael and Gopriel, which meant that the ordinary Skywings were unable to maintain their rationality while in the Berserk state. The proof was that the Skywings had only been in the air for a short while before becoming restless. This completely proved that the ordinary Skywings were unable to completely resist the effects of the Berserk state. As such, the Skywings, who had lost their rationality, truly became weapons of war and could only follow the orders of others. Wuming sighed. To be honest, he would rather the Skywing species not be Berserker. He would rather not have the attribute bonus from Berserk. What he wanted were rational helpers not weapons that completely obeyed his orders. It was also Wu Ming's fault for not making the necessary preparations, which resulted in the Sky Wings being summoned as berserkers. However, the berserker class was quite compatible with the Skywing species. Without deliberately choosing a class, the Skywing species were collectively chosen as berserkers. It could only be said that the Skywing species were indeed worthy of being called weapons by the other races. In short, although Wu Ming was somewhat dissatisfied, the Skywings were rather satisfied with their current ranks. The most typical example was Gabriel, who was standing in front of Wu Ming. Hey, master, aren't you going to find that Sun King? Why don't we just kill our way over there? How about it? Gabriel excitedly egged on Wu Ming. Little Gabriel, master has his own plans, meow. Azrael retorted. Azrael was not wrong, but Wu Ming's plan was ruined when he learned that the Skywings were all berserkers. Well, what does it matter? Plans can be changed. Gabriel looked at Wu Ming with a bright smile. Let the other Skywings be on standby in Abanthe, Wu Ming suddenly said. That means... Azrael seemed to have understood something. We have a mission, right? Gabriel excitedly flapped her wings, white feathers flying everywhere. Wu Ming nodded, which made the two Skywings very happy. To the Skywings, fighting was their way of survival. In the beginning, Arceus created the Godslayer weapons known as the Skywings' only one goal, to kill himself. Unable to find an opponent, he could only rely on himself to kill himself. But even Artesius would choose the path of suicide. Thus, he created the Skywings were. It was very funny, right? Arceus did not create the Godslayer weapons to kill other gods, but to kill himself. This might be laughable in the eyes of others, or even other gods, but in Wu Ming's eyes, it was a matter of course. Up until now, Silent Wonder had met many people and visited many worlds and places. He could understand Arthur's unparalleled loneliness. It was precisely because of this that Arceus had used all his strength in his battle with Wu Ming, not holding back. The result was naturally Arceus's defeat. Even if he had to pay the price of death, Arceus would accept it because he had fulfilled his wish. However, the Skywings did not. Although Arceus's goal in creating the Skywings was to kill himself, to his surprise, the Skywings did not have the power to kill him. As for the Skywings that were born from the broken wings of the god of war, Arceus, they only had two goals after they were born: loyalty and battle. The ultimate goal of the Skywing species was to obtain victory for their master, Arceus, through constant battles and personally offer him the Star Cup. As for where they would go after the battle, they had never thought about it. As long as Arceus was around, there would be no problem. However, Arceus had been killed by Wu Ming. Cough, cough. It could not be said that he had been killed by Wu Ming. That was the path Arceus had chosen. He had chosen to fight Wu Ming with his life, even though he had never won against Wu Ming. Arceus was satisfied. He had finally been defeated, although the price was death. Although the Skywings could not fulfill Arceus's wish, at the very least, the Skywings were Arceus's kin. Arceus and the Skywings still had a relationship of subjects. Thus, Arceus, who understood the Skywings, prepared a way out for them. Knowing that he was about to die, Arceus entrusted the Skywings to Wu Ming. Arceus knew very well that if the Skywings lost him, they would have no one loyal to them. If Wu Ming obtained victory, the Star Cup would definitely fall into his hands. If the order of the world was reset, the Skywings would very likely lose their right to fight. This was because the new world would no longer be allowed to be destroyed by force. As such, the Skywings would lose their reason to live. Unlike Arceus, the Skywings would definitely choose to commit suicide after losing their reason to live. It was like a swarm of bees losing their queen or a swarm of ants losing their queen. Those who had been willing to be subordinates for a long time and were used to following their superiors' orders would be at a loss and have nothing to do once they lost their superiors. This was the case for humans and animals. A simple Godslayer weapon would naturally be scrapped after losing its user. Thus, Arceus entrusted the Skywings to Wu Ming, an enemy that Arceus liked. After that, Arceus left in satisfaction, and the Skywings gained a new lease of life because of Artheus' final order. Whether it was that Wooming had replaced Artheus as the pillar of support for the Skywings, or that Wooming had only respected Artheus and pitted the Skywings, in any case, the Skywings and Wooming were now inseparable. After the Skywings collectively swore their loyalty to Wooming and signed a dependent contract, Wooming treated them as his own. To put it bluntly, if Artheus suddenly came back to life and wanted to take the Skywings, Wooming would probably not agree. Of course, even if Artheus came back to life, he would not do such a thing. Although Wooming and Artheus had only interacted in that battle, Artheus was too easy to understand. Thus, Wooming believed that Artheus would not do such a thing. Shaking his head, Wooming stopped thinking about this matter and instead looked at Azriel and Jillian, who were quietly waiting for him. Azriel, go and support Tachika and the others. Wooming began to give orders. Chapter 702. Although Da Vinci is with Tachika and Matthew, I'm still a little uneasy. Compared to the other Skywings, you're more steady. If something happens, just act according to the situation. Wooming looked into Azriel's eyes with trust. Wooming believed that Azriel could handle this matter well. After all, the title of the first individual to command the Skywings was not just for show. Yes, Meow. Azriel's eyes turned cold as she replied confidently. Okay, go on. Wooming nodded. Azriel spread her wings and was about to fly in the direction of Gadatsi and the others when Wooming suddenly called out to her. Right, there's something you need to pay attention to. Try not to be discovered by them. Wooming extended a finger, indicating the importance of this matter. Azriel was taken aback, but she quickly reacted and nodded. From a moment she descended into this world as a servant, Azriel could tell that the orange-haired woman had an unusual relationship with her master. And after she rashly launched an attack on the orange-haired woman, Azriel realized just how important the orange-haired woman was to her master. Her master wanted her to support the other party and try not to be discovered. This was undoubtedly to temper the other party. No matter what race it was, they would all perish in peace. The Skywings understood this, but they did not take it to heart. This was because they would not let themselves live in peace. Instead, they would do their best to put themselves in a dangerous state. This was because they were weapons and they needed to fight. Although the information was not complete, Azriel understood that while the orange-haired woman was very weak, the other party was not ordinary. It could be said that she had a rather strong heart. She did not panic even after nearly being cut to death by her scythe. From this, one could see the mental fortitude of the other party. However, the other party was truly too weak. The orange-haired woman was so weak that there was no limit to it. That little girl with the shield was worth a second glance, but it was just a glance. If Wooming could hear Azriel's inner thoughts, he would feel helpless. Whether it was Gudatsi, who was the master, or Matthew, who was the servant, they had done their part and reached the height they should have reached. It was already a miracle that Gudatsi, who had no knowledge of magic and was only forced to come here to make up the numbers, had made it this far. If other magicians were to be the master, they would have fallen at some point. There was also Matthew. As a human who accepted the power of a servant and became a subservient, Matthew's strength at the moment was already a second-rate servant. To be able to reach this level as a subservient, no one else would be able to do it. The reason why they were able to persevere was not because of their powerful strength, but because they were more determined than anyone else. Because of the beauty and strength of the heart, Gadatsi met servants who were willing to help her and helped her break through the difficulties. Because of the tenacity and perseverance of the heart, Matthew's shield was able to block all attacks on Gadatsi, because Galahad's shield was completely in line with Matthew's characteristics. As long as the heart was firm, the shield would not be broken. This was the special nature of Galahad's shield, which made the shield in existence comparable to Artoria's absolute defense. Avalon and Wooming were invincible armors. This was the power of the heart. However, in Azriel's view, it was not enough to have a strong heart. Gadotsi and the others were still very weak. Therefore, it was normal for Azrael to say that they were too weak. After all, Azrael was a god-slayer. In the eyes of the god-slayer's skywings, whether it was Gadotsi or Matthew, they were too weak. Just as Matthew had thought before, if Azrael had slashed Matthew's shield a few more times, Matthew's shield would probably have fallen out his hands. And if Wuming had not intervened, Azrael could have teleported behind Gadotsi and beheaded her, and she would have done it so quickly that Matthew would not have been able to react. In the eyes of the strong or respected skywings, weakness was the original sin. The forest elves were too weak, so Azrael's sky strike destroyed their capital. Humans were too weak, so the aftermath of the battle between a dozen races and the various gods of creation led them to the brink of extinction. The other races were too weak, so they were suppressed by the Forest Elf Alliance, the Goblins Alliance, and the Skywings. Meanwhile, Art Hugh was too weak, so he had indirectly died at the hands of Wuming, and the Skywings had been entrusted to Wuming. In the eyes of others, Wuming could have rejected Arthu's request and exterminated the Skywings with the intention of eliminating them by the roots. However, Wuming did not do so. Instead, he complied with Arthu's wishes and chose to take the Skywings under his command. To put it bluntly, the reason the Skywings had submitted to Wuming was not only because of Arthu's dying wish, but also because they were too weak. Again, weakness was the original sin. And it was precisely because they were weak that Gadotsi and Matthew needed to be tempered. It was also because of this that Wuming had instructed Azrael not to expose herself as much as possible. No matter who it was, the strength of their companions would often encourage them to slack off. Only when they were cornered would they go all out, and only when they went all out would their potential be stimulated. It was precisely because Gadotsi would always be in a cornered situation that she would always put her life on the line, and this spirit infected many of her followers, making them willingly follow Gadotsi. However, there was another saying that was very good. How can a person's shoes not get wet when walking by the river? Gadotsi would always be in a cornered situation, so if she went all out, it would be very easy for her to fail. In order to avoid such a situation, there was only one way. That was to make Gadotsi more and more accustomed to the situation of being cornered and gradually reduce the level of cornered to the level of sudden events so that he would not have to risk his life to pass every time. As such, Azrael understood Wuming's intentions very well. Yes, master, understand meow. Azrael looked into Wuming's eyes and nodded. Then, magic surged, and she flapped her wings and flew into the distance. Watching Azrael leave, Wuming looked at Giliel. Is it my turn, master? Do I have a mission? Giliel excitedly pulled Wuming's arm. If it's Giliel, why don't you take a guess? Wuming smiled mischievously. Could it be the Sun King who attacked the desert? Giliel instantly said, based on the available information, their current enemies were only the East and West, and the East enemy had been handed over to Azrael. So, if she was the one, it should be the West enemy, the guy who added the Sun King. You guessed right. Wuming nodded. However, before Giliel could cheer, Wuming's next sentence made her expression freeze. But it's with me. Chapter 703. In the sky at the center of the wasteland, Abelheim quietly floated high up in the sky, basking in the sunlight. The crystalline leaves on Abelheim's body glowed a dark blue under the sunlight, swaying as if it was breathing, giving off the impression that it was asleep. However, while Abelheim was not sleeping, the Skywings in its body were asleep. This was because the Skywings had lived on Abelheim's body since ancient times, and Abelheim's body had evolved into a fortress, so every Skywing had its own room. However, Abelheim did not have any doors or windows. All it had were the branches of a giant tree and the crystalline bodies that resembled leaves. The Skywings had special properties that allowed them to freely travel through space, so they did not need doors or windows. This was why Abelheim did not have any doors or windows on its body. Inside Abelheim's body, there were only rooms. Although there were corridors, they were relatively rare. After all, the Skywings could basically just pass through walls. In the bedroom-like rooms of the Skywings were floating in the air, wrapped in their own wings as they slept. Wuming was afraid that the Skywings would go berserk and run amok after he, Azrael, and Gopral left, so he had ordered them to enter this sleep-like standby state. There was a reason why the Skywing species was called a weapon. This standby state was a low-energy state that the Skywing species could achieve. Every time they were seriously injured, they would maintain this state when they used a special regenerative device to repair their bodies. Although there were some who did not like to enter this standby state, such as Gopral, there was no doubt that this standby state had a faster effect on their recovery, which was why they maintained this state. Sometimes, when the Skywings lost their energy and became children, they could use the regenerative device to speed up their recovery. This was because if they did not use the regenerative device, they would have to wait several hundred years to recover. When the Skywings used the regenerative device, they would have their companions around them to protect them. After all, the regenerative device required the Skywings to activate it. However, there were no records of the Skywings collectively repairing themselves, nor are there any records of the Skywings collectively entering a standby state. If the enemy took this opportunity to attack, they would be done for. However, there was still Abenheim. After Wuming had the Skywings collectively enter a hibernation state, he had Abenheim enter the highest state of alert. As long as there was any movement in Abenheim's surroundings or inside, Abenheim would instantly awaken all the Skywings and enter attack mode. Abenheim was not to be underestimated. As a phantasma, which was ranked second among the 16 Exceed races, Abenheim didn't just have an advantage in terms of the amount of sprites in his body. He was an existence that could mutate and evolve into a demon king that was close to the level of a god. How could he be weak? When the deities did not appear, phantasma were the strongest. Therefore, when Arthas did not appear, the Skywing breeds in Arthas camp were not the strongest. The strongest Skywing breeds under Arthas should be Abenheim, who was a phantasma. He was an existence only under Old Deus, which could be said to be the closest to a god. Previously, the Lion King and the Sun King had launched attacks of almost the same degree at the same time, and the Skywings had to work together to block the Lion King's attack. However, when faced with the Sun King's thunderous attack, Abenheim alone, no, a phantasma, had blocked it. This was the best proof of Abenheim's strength. Furthermore, Abenheim had the attribute bonus of being a rider. Although it was a little strange for him to ride himself, at the very least, Abenheim's strength had been increased, and he had not sacrificed his rationality like the Skywings. Whether it was a frontal attack or a sneak attack, Wuming believed that Abenheim would be able to discover and stop the enemy, protecting the Skywings. Wuming reckoned that in this era, at this singularity, only the mysterious First Hassan could infiltrate Abenheim. Although this was an era where multiple Hassans existed, based on the information Wuming had gathered, the First Hassan should not appear. First, the First Hassan had never appeared in historical records, and no one had ever claimed to have seen him. Be it the records of the summoner or the historical records of this person, they were all very mysterious. It was said that the First Hassan would behead the previous Hassan when they went astray, following the sound of the evening bell, and then enter the mystery again. This meant that it was very likely that the other party would not appear, and even if he did appear, he would be looking for Hassan and not Abenheim or the Skywings. Apart from the First Hassan, Wuming did not think that there was anyone in this era and singularity who could affect Abenheim and the Skywings. Thus, with Abenheim around, Wuming was very assured. After instructing Abenheim to protect the Skywings, Wuming set off with Gopral. Because both of them could fly, Wuming and Gopral flew toward the desert. Wuming lowered his head and looked at the border between the desert and the wasteland. There was a huge crater that was not inferior to the crater created by the Holy Spear. This was the mark left behind by the collision between the Sun King and Abenheim, and it happened to be on the border between the desert and the wasteland. However, this was not the main point. Wuming was thinking about how Ramses II had unleashed that attack. Wuming had seen very clearly that it was an attack in the form of a lightning pillar, and Wuming had no doubt that it had been unleashed by some huge object. Could it have been unleashed by the other side's temple? Wuming wondered. Based on Gadatsi's information, Wuming had obtained some information about Ramses II. The other side was a rider, and he had summoned the entire desert, an army of sphinxes, and even gathered all the temples in one place. From the looks of it, the other side's mounts had to be those temples. As for why it was not the sphinxes, it was because, according to Gadatsi's information, those sphinxes came in a large group. Rare things were expensive, and too many of them were cheap. If the mounts were those sphinxes, then Ramses II's value would be too low. Wuming joked before shaking his head. In short, no matter what the other side's mounts were, if they could not come to an agreement, he would just have Gopral unleash a sky strike. With that in mind, Wuming looked at the beaming Gopral flying beside him. Seeing Wuming look at her, Gopral's smile became even more radiant. "What's the matter, master?" Chapter 704. "Are you okay, Gopral?" Wuming smiled awkwardly. Wuming felt that his joke just now had made Gopral unhappy. Gopral originally thought that she could go alone, but in the end, she had to go with Wuming. How unpleasant was that? It was like a parent agreeing to let you go out and play with your friends, but in the end, when you were playing with your friends, the parent was sitting next to you. How restrained was that? Wuming felt that Gopral was now a child who was throwing a tantrum, and he was the parent who made her throw a tantrum. "I'm completely fine, master." Gopral's smile became even brighter. "If you're fine, then you're fine." Wuming nodded calmly and stopped asking. Wuming felt that if he continued to ask, something terrible might happen. Not only did women have sixth sense, but so did Wuming. And Wuming believed in his intuition most of the time, because his intuition was right every time. Right, master, let's go steal something this time. Do you want me to use Sky Strike directly?" Gopral suggested kindly. Overruled. Wuming rejected Gopral's suggestion without even thinking about it. Why? Is master not going to let me do it?" Gopral guessed with a very puzzled expression. "How could that be?" Wuming shook his head, expressing that he would not think that way. "I hope you don't have to do it, but that's too unrealistic." Wuming thought in his heart. In fact, rather than Wuming bringing Gopral to find Ramses II, it was more accurate to say that Wuming is worried that an accident will happen if he leaves Gopral alone. If Gopral were to be on standby or follow Azrael to the Holy City, Wuming felt that Gopral would definitely do something. After all, she was now a berserker. Even Azrael, who was the original individual, was affected by berserk. Wuming did not think that Gopral was not affected by berserk. Although Gopral did not seem to have changed at all, this was just the calm before the storm. Wuming believed that if Gopral no longer suppressed herself and completely released herself, she would definitely become a true berserker. Although it was not to the extent of harming her allies, the Skywings and Wuming, Gadatsi and the others would not be spared. Moreover, if Gopral were to get angry, she would probably kill her allies just the same. That was why Wuming had chosen to have Gopral follow him and not act alone or with others. According to the information from Tachika and the others, Ramses II probably won't be able to summon the Holy Grail so easily. When the time comes, I don't mind you using Sky Strike. Wuming's words made Gopral's eyes light up. Really, master? But take it easy when using Sky Strike. Don't use up all your mana, Wuming emphasized. Yes, I'll control it, master. Gopral gave Wuming an obedient smile. However, the more obedient Gopral was, the more uneasy Wuming felt. Gopral was the kind of person who could use up all her elves with a single Sky Strike. She would definitely not save them for a second Sky Strike. However, Gopral could not be said to be stupid, only reckless. No Skywing would directly use Sky Strike on the Forest Elf capital just because they got a bump on their head from the defensive magic of the Forest Elves. That was the capital of the Forest Elves. Even she would have to check the situation before launching an attack. What if the enemy had some secret weapon? However, because of the bump on her head, Gopperl had directly used Sky Strike at its maximum capacity. The important thing was that Gopperl had succeeded. She had successfully destroyed the capital of the Forest Elves. A large number of precious books that recorded many spells had been plundered, and the Forest Elves had directly changed their capital. There was no doubt that there was a problem with this. If the Forest Elves were so weak that they were almost wiped out by a Skywing, then what qualifications did they have to be the best in this war? As for the reason, Wuming had learned from Azrael. At the time, the Forest Elves had just fought with the goblins, and the Forest Elves had been stolen by the goblins. The Forest Elves, who had activated all sorts of spells, including the Forbidden Flight spell, were prepared to use this opportunity to correct themselves. In the end, it was the Forbidden Flight spell that had caused Gopperl, who had been drawn over by the battle, to be hit. Afterward, Gopperl touched the bump on her head with tears in her eyes and used Sky Strike on the Forest Elves' capital, which nearly exhausted all the elves in her body. The Forest Elves' most serious problem was that after they had repelled the goblins, they had been ambushed by the Skywings. Gopperl left with a large number of books in satisfaction, while the Forest Elves retreated, choosing to directly retreat and rebuild their capital in another place. After all, that place had already been discovered by the goblins and was no longer safe. Sooner or later, they would have to find another place to build their new capital. Moreover, that place had been baptized by the Skywings' Sky Strike. Compared to building a new capital after rebuilding it, the Forest Elves chose to build their new capital in another place. Azrael already told me that after you brought the books you obtained from raiding the Forest Elves' capital back to Abanti, your body became smaller due to overexertion of your elves. Wuming bluntly exposed Gopperl's past. That's because I was too angry, actually causing a bump on my noble head. How could I not teach those long-eared fellows a lesson? Gopperl stroked her head as if it was a treasure. Gopperl understood what Wuming was talking about. After all, even she had only succeeded in raiding a capital once. Furthermore, I had good control over my elves. Even I wouldn't expose my weak people to the enemy, Gopperl said solemnly. That was because if they had encountered a slightly stronger enemy at that time, the only outcome would have been death. While it was true that the Skywings were weapons, they would not fearlessly throw their lives away. Thus, the Skywings would basically not let themselves exhaust their energy and turn into children, or rather, they would do their best to avoid that, except for Gopperl. Whether it was healing injuries or recovering energy, only Gopperl would frequently use it. Even the Skywings would not directly use Sky Strike. After all, it consumed too much energy. Only Gopperl would frequently use Sky Strike without restraint. It could only be said that she truly lived up to her name. Not only was her strength outstanding, even her personality was unrivaled. It was not as if this bold heart of hers did not bring benefits. Gopperl had a superhuman record of challenging the dragon elves 5 times and finally successfully subduing them all by herself. Although Gopperl had almost died. Besides, isn't Master still here? I believe that Master won't ignore me, his kin. Gopperl had an expression of hugging the thigh of a big shot. This made Wuming helplessly smile. Arthas is no longer here, so I'm now your guardian. Whether it's you or the other Skywings, you'd better be careful. I don't want to see your numbers dwindle so soon after Arthas entrusted you to me. After Wuming said that, he gave Gopperl a knock on the head. Ouch! Gopperl's eyes were filled with tears. Wuming helplessly shook his head. Gopperl was clearly faking it. He had not used much strength, but this could be considered giving Wuming face. Afterward, Wuming increased his speed, and without turning his head, he said to Gopperl, who was hugging her head with tears in her eyes, "Hurry up and follow me. If you're too slow, I won't give you the chance to use Sky Strike." Sure enough, Jillian instantly smiled and spread her wings, catching up to him. Yes, yes, Master. Chapter 705. Due to the increased flying speed, Wuming and Gopperl soon entered the desert area. Perhaps the Sun King knew that Wuming was coming, but a sandstorm suddenly appeared in the desert where the weather was not bad. Moreover, this was not an ordinary sandstorm. The magic power contained in it was enough to easily crush an ordinary human body. With that, Wu Ming was even more certain that it was caused by the Sun King. As for the reason, Wu Ming did not think that it was because of expulsion, but because the power of the sandstorm was too weak. Perhaps it was because Wu Ming and Gopral flew in, and the Sun King's goal was to force Wu Ming and Gopral to land. However, Wu Ming did not want to buy it because he had no intention of obtaining the Holy Grail peacefully, and there was no need for it. In the sandstorm, Wu Ming and Gopral were still flying. Apart from being a little blurry, the sandstorm did not hinder Wu Ming and Gopral in any way. Gopral only needed to keep magic power around her body to isolate the sandstorm from her body. Wu Ming was even more simple and crude. He only laid out a layer of psychic power around himself. Wu Ming also tried to break the sandstorm, but every time he did, a new sandstorm would appear in a few seconds. In addition, after entering the desert, Wu Ming had a feeling that he had entered someone else's territory. Therefore, Wu Ming guessed that the entire desert was likely under the Sun King's control. But judging from the fact that the Sun King only summoned the sandstorm in the desert area, the Sun King's control might not be strong. The reason was unknown. All right, Wu Ming also vaguely saw something similar to a sphinx in the sandstorm. That should be the sphinx mentioned in the information provided by Gadotsi. But every time Gopral unwillingly broke the sandstorm, the sphinx would disappear without a trace. Only when the sandstorm was summoned again would the sphinx reveal a trace of their figure. After Wu Ming broke the sandstorm for the first time and saw that the sandstorm was summoned again in a few seconds, he no longer bothered to deal with the sandstorm. However, Gopral refused to give up and kept trying. Although she was also interested in the sphinx, Wu Ming felt that it was more due to Gopral's character and the influence of the Berserker. Although Gopral failed every time, Gopral was so angry that she almost released Sky Strike. If Wu Ming had not stopped her, she would have been in a stalemate with the sandstorm until her mana ran out. Just like that, accompanied by the sandstorm, Wu Ming and Gopral flew toward the location of the central shrine provided by Gadotsi. This hateful sand is really annoying. Gopral gritted her teeth and followed behind Wu Ming. The sand rolled up by the sandstorm was like raindrops that constantly slapped against the mana released by Gopral. This made Gopral, who was helpless against the sandstorm, very frustrated. You have to learn to calm down. I won't let you change your habit of loving slaughter. Not to mention, you who love slaughter need to be calm, because once you lose your cool, it means that you have lost half the battle. So, you need to calm yourself down quickly, Wu Ming said to Gopral without turning his head. Although Wu Ming was not against slaughter, he did not like it either. Moreover, Wu Ming, who was used to living a peaceful life, was gradually moving closer to not liking slaughter. Besides, if you use your mana recklessly because you're frustrated, when your mana runs out, you'll have to leave. You don't want to leave immediately after arriving in another world, right? You won't be able to enjoy anything like that. Wu Ming scared Gopral. Isn't there still a master? After I arrived in this world, I received some strange information. A master can replenish a servant's mana. With a master here, how can I leave? Gopral had an expression that said, this way, it won't matter even if I casually release Sky Strike. Indeed, because there were too many Sky Wings, Wu Ming could not continuously supply mana to them. To put it simply, he had cut off the mana supply link. However, if the Sky Wings ran out of mana, Wu Ming still had a way to supply them with mana. All he had to do was open the mana supply link. After all, Wu Ming was the master of the Sky Wings. Although the mana supply contract was not connected, the master-servant contract still existed. As long as there was a master-servant contract between the Sky Wings and Wu Ming, the Sky Wings would not disappear. As such, Wu Ming could take the initiative to open the mana supply link and provide the Sky Wings with mana. That's the case, but I can also choose not to provide you with mana, Gopral. Wu Ming smugly smiled. Why is it like this, master? Gopral's expression instantly turned sullen. She did not think that Wu Ming was joking. She had a feeling that if Gopral really used her mana recklessly and left due to a lack of mana, Wuming would definitely not provide her with mana. Right after that, Gopril's expression changed once more. But I'm really annoyed. Although these annoying grains of sand can be crushed like flesh, they can always regenerate. It's really annoying. Gopril tried to act cute. After all, Gopril was not Wuming. If even Wuming was a little dissatisfied, there was no need to mention Gopril. She did not have that kind of patience. Moreover, Jillian was currently a berserker. Berserk was constantly affecting her. However, even if Gopril was not affected by Berserk, she would still be so irritable. After all, she was the alien Gopril that gave the Skywings a headache. Then close your eyes and don't look. Just fly straight ahead, Wuming very irresponsibly said. Master is bullying me. I'm going to complain to Azrael. Wuming did not say anything else. He felt that it might be because he had been very kind, which led to Gopril's reckless behavior. Although Wuming did not find it annoying, there were times when Wuming felt a headache coming on because of Gopril. However, there was nothing he could do about it. Aside from Gopril, the other Skywings treated Wuming with respect, not showing any signs of dissatisfaction or enmity. Thus, Wuming did not need to appear very fierce. Gopril was the only one who treated Wuming very casually, and Wuming could not be bothered to get angry. Thus, in such situations, he would just ignore Gopril. Master up ahead. Wuming was a little distracted as he wondered if he should change his attitude. Gopril's voice brought Wuming back to his senses. Looking up ahead, Wuming saw that there were quite a few Egyptian buildings not far away, and the sandstorm around them had basically dissipated. In other words, have we arrived? Chapter 706. The sandstorm dissipated without a trace, and the sun shone directly on the vast desert. A large group of ancient Egyptian buildings stood in the desert illuminated by the sun. The sun seemed to be a foil, shining on these magnificent buildings like the residence of the sun god. What appeared in front of Wuming were ancient buildings, including pyramids, temples, and so on. Generally speaking, such large buildings should not be built together. Coupled with the fact that Wuming did not see any buildings on the way, it undoubtedly confirmed one point. The other party had moved the buildings that were originally scattered in the desert to form such a magnificent group of buildings. And the other party did not place them randomly. The placement of these buildings was full of architectural aesthetics. The pyramids were next to each other, and the temples seemed to be combined. They were no less magnificent than the pyramids. The walls of each building were carved with figures and beautiful patterns. The sphinxes around the buildings were like guards, standing on both sides of the buildings, giving people a feeling that they could really come to life. A large number of giant pillars stood in the open space, setting off the other buildings. It was quite spectacular. Wuming glanced around. The number of buildings here was at least dozens, and the various buildings were compatible with each other, giving people a sense of natural beauty. And these buildings looked as if they had always been here. It was impossible to tell that they had been moved here. These buildings were obviously in the ancient Egyptian style, but they did not have an ancient aura. They were all brand new, as if they had been baptized by the sun, as expected of the famous Ramses II. In my opinion, history's praise for him has been degraded a lot, Wuming praised. Wuming had never seen Ramses II, but he knew a lot from history books and other records. Ramses II succeeded the throne. In order to consolidate Egypt, he sent troops abroad and carried out expeditions. And he fought intermittent wars with the empire that occupied Syria at that time, the Hittite Empire, for 16 years. At that time, the Hittites were not weak, because if they were weak, they would not have been able to occupy most of the land in Syria. The geographical location of Syria at that time was quite controversial. Ancient Syria was located at the junction of Asia, Africa, and Europe. It was the central link of sea and land trade. However, the superior geographical location attracted the attention of the surrounding powers, and the ancient Egyptian kingdom was even more interested in it. However, since the Hittites were able to occupy most of Syria, their strength was needless to say. Ramses II, who was able to fight a war with the Hittites, was not weak in terms of military strength. After concluding a peace treaty with the Hittites, Ramses II used his own talent and communication to bring ancient Egypt to its peak. As a pharaoh, king of gods, he loved the people, and the people loved him. After Ramses II died, people worshipped him as the incarnation of the sun god Ra. Although he claimed to be the incarnation of the sun god when he was alive, although ancient Egypt immediately fell after his death, this did not hinder Ramses II's great achievements. In addition to these, Ramses II was also quite accomplished in the art of architecture. He had built many temples and rebuilt many of his predecessors' buildings, including temples, grottos, mausoleums, pyramids, sphinxes, and so on. He added bricks and tiles to those ancient buildings, making them more artistic. In the last 30 years of his life, Ramses II built a large number of shrines like crazy. Moreover, he arrogantly engraved his name on all the buildings of the previous generations that he had modified. What was even more serious was that he had randomly changed the monuments and portraits of people to his own, trying to claim the achievements of the previous generations of pharaohs as his own. Wuming estimated that it was for these reasons that Ramses II could have such a magnificent complex of buildings. In short, Ramses II could be said to be one of the greatest pharaohs in the history of ancient Egypt. Suddenly, a man's wild laughter resounded over the entire shrine. "Ah, good, very good, Silver Knight. Praise me to your heart's content. Ha!" The wild laughter continued, making people wonder how much air the man had in his lungs. "This laughter is probably Ramses II," Wuming said to Giliel, who was flying beside him. Perhaps only Ramses II would laugh out loud after hearing Wu Ming praise Ramses II. "Master, it seems that he's very arrogant." Giliel's eyes glowed red. "Calm down, Giliel." Wu Ming pressed his hand, which was enchanted with magic, on Giliel's head and rubbed it a few times. "I know." Giliel, who had originally wanted to kill him, instantly calmed down. She hid behind Wu Ming and tidied up her hair, which had become a chicken's nest. Even if she was a skywing, even if she was a weapon, Giliel was still a young girl. What a joke. Why would a skywing care about her appearance? The reason Giliel hid behind Wu Ming was that when Wu Ming rubbed Giliel's head, the magic power emitted from his hand hit Giliel's head. That hit was no less than if Wu Ming had hit Giliel's head. As for why he didn't just knock her on the head, since there were outsiders present, he had to give Jillian some face. As for why Giliel hid behind Wu Ming, it was because Giliel's body was slightly stronger. Wu Ming had increased the output of magic power. Thus, Giliel had already suffered a slight concussion. Only at this level could Jillian's crazy mind calm down. After making Giliel behave, Wu Ming looked at the shrine complex below. "Sun King, why don't you come out and welcome the guests?" Wu Ming's voice was very soft, but because of the magic power, it could still spread throughout the shrine complex. The other party did not reply, but a few seconds later, a figure walked out from the entrance of the central shrine. Wu Ming took a closer look and saw that it was a dark-skinned young girl. Her long hair reached the ground, and she wore gorgeous accessories on her head, body, and limbs. Her revealing Egyptian clothes could only cover her chest and lower body. She held a simple scepter with an eagle's head at the top. "Please follow me. Lord Osmins is already waiting in the hall." Chapter 707. A black-skinned, noble-looking, long-haired girl holding a scepter. This was the information Wu Ming obtained from Gadotsi about Pharaoh Nitornis. And this new girl matched the characteristics of Nitornis's information very well. Wu Ming guessed that the girl who came out to welcome Wu Ming and Goprel should be the Nitornis mentioned in the information provided by Gadotsi. And according to Gadotsi, Nitornis seemed to be a subordinate of Ramses II. In other words, this invitation was not issued by Nitornis, but by Ramses II. Facing Ramses II's invitation that seemed like a feast at Hong Min, Wu Ming's heart was unperturbed, and he did not feel like laughing. Gopril, stay here, Wu Ming said to Gopril behind him. Yeah. Why, master? Gopril, who was holding her head in discomfort due to her concussion, instantly felt better. She suddenly came to Wu Ming's side, spread her wings, and flapped them. I have an important mission for you. Remember, if I don't come out after half an hour, or if something strange happens after I enter the temple, use Sky Strike. Wu Ming tilted his head and looked at Gopril, who had flown to his left. Then, Gopril became excited. Can I use Sky Strike? Understood. Leave it to me, master. Remember the conditions. I'm not letting you use Sky Strike casually, Wu Ming emphasized helplessly. Yes, master, don't worry and go. Just leave the rest to me. Giliel seemed to understand and nodded with a smile. However, Wu Ming suspected that Gopril might not have listened, but it did not matter. Wu Ming did not expect Gopril to listen. He only needed her to stay outside obediently. Wu Ming was afraid that Gopril and Wu Ming would cause trouble after entering the shrine. The laughter from before was undoubtedly from Ramses II, and through that laughter, Wu Ming could determine that Ramses II was definitely a king comparable to Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh might seem to treat Wu Ming well, but as Gilgamesh's guardian, Wu Ming understood Gilgamesh very well. Gilgamesh was an out-and-out villain in modern society. But this was not the point. The point was that Gilgamesh's mouth was too stinky. Through Ramses II's laughter, Wu Ming realized that Ramses II was probably a character similar to Gilgamesh. Of course, the other party might not have as stinky a mouth as Gilgamesh, but his character was definitely peculiar. And with Gopril's irritable character and the berserk effect brought about by the berserker rank, Wu Ming judged that Ramses II was a guy who did not get along well with Gopril. Since the other party was trying peaceful means before resorting to force, Wu Ming naturally wouldn't disrespect the other party. However, if Wu Ming were to bring Jillian in as well, Jillian would probably get so angry that she would start a fight right away. There was another point. If Wu Ming and Ramses II's negotiation fell apart, then Gopril could act as support and directly attack from the outside. All in all, it was best for Gopril to stay outside. Also, take it easy when releasing Sky Strike. Don't use up all your magic power in one go, Wu Ming reminded. Yes, master, I will pay attention. Looking at Gopril's rather sincere face, Wu Ming chose to give up. Then, Wu Ming flew toward the entrance of the great shrine below. Seeing that only Wu Ming had come over, Nitocris did not have any doubts. A king should talk to a king. What was the point of dragging a subordinate along? Even Nitocris herself was prepared to leave after bringing Wu Ming to Ramses II's room in the great shrine. Please follow me, Sir Knight. Nitocris bowed slightly and said respectfully to Wu Ming. Wu Ming nodded, and then the two entered the entrance together. The shadows engulfed the two. Gopril watched as Wu Ming entered the great shrine. She had originally been flying in the sky, but now she was lying down in the sky, not minding that she was wearing revealing clothes. Needless to say, the skywing species that was full of elves and now had wings full of magic power could indeed lie down in the sky like this. Then, what should I do to pass the time now? Gopril said, bored. She could naturally wait, but she had to find something to pass the time. Strictly speaking, Wu Ming did not restrict Gopril from finding something to do to pass the time. At this time, Gopril inadvertently saw some creatures that resembled sphinxes emerging from the sand in the desert below. The sphinxes gathered at the great shrine where Wu Ming had entered, looking around vigilantly like guards. Gopril laughed, the kind that was very happy. In the great shrine, in the corridor leading to the central stone room, Nitocris walked in front, and Wu Ming followed behind. Nitocris led Wu Ming silently, and Wu Ming followed behind silently. The former was because there was no need to take the initiative to speak, while the latter was because he was admiring the murals on both sides of the corridor. Wu Ming was very interested in these murals, or rather, it was because Wu Ming had never seen any murals before. Although Wu Ming had experienced many worlds and spent a lot of time, Wu Ming had never seen any murals before. Although he was not curious, Wu Ming was quite interested in these precious products of human spiritual culture. Since there was a chance to come into contact with them, Wuming naturally would not let it go. Although Wuming did not know much about murals and did not understand the meaning expressed by the murals, he could still understand the contents of these murals. These murals depicted the deeds of Ramses II, including the succession of Ramses II, his love and marriage with Nefertari, the war against the Hittite Empire, the signing of contracts, the construction of buildings, the making of ancient Egypt to prosperity, and all the other deeds. It was like a historical poem of Ramses II. However, Wuming smiled and shook his head at the fact that Ramses II had recorded almost all his deeds on the murals. "This guy is quite narcissistic," Wuming commented casually. Hearing Wuming's words, Nitocris, who was walking in front of Wuming, suddenly spoke. "It's not narcissism. It's the honor that Lord Osmond deserves." What Nitocris said was reasonable, but Wuming did not care about this. He was more concerned about Nitocris, who had a fate with Gadotsi. "You are the Pharaoh Nitocris of ancient Egypt, right? You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.